Right now with capitalism, all of the gains in automation, it goes to the owner class. All you have to do is have everyone be an owner, and now suddenly any gain in automation is a gain for everybody. If you grow just one thing, it may not grow as well as if it grows with another thing. A good example of that is called the Three Sisters method of farming.
There is definitely multi-apartment buildings or multi-families that do passive design.
$100 million that they gave to Joe Rogan that they would kind of be out if they breach contract. Is that a bigger number, or is 2 billion a bigger number?
I don't know,
It's
Zach.
a tough one. I
It's
know,
really hard.
and maybe
Yes.
comparing numbers is not Jeremy's strong suit. Gotta go kill a Jenny.
I still don't think you should kill her. I don't think it's a good idea.
It's a ghost, dude. Welcome, everybody, back to Bread Theory. Tonight, I'm going to be joined again by recurring guest Dan Plaat of the Three Left Show, and we're going to be talking about politics 1950s style. So he has an old handbook for political organizing that he would like to go over with us, and that's what we're going to do. So it looks like he is there. I'm not sure if I'm getting any of his audio or sound. I think I can hear you, Dan.
Yeah, videos in too.
Huh.
Let's try turning it on. No,
No, that's strange.
that's weird. It should be going to you, or it's going to
Yeah,
the system.
yeah.
Let's
All
see.
I'm seeing is your virtual OBS camera. So maybe you have the wrong
Right.
source selected.
I don't. Yeah, let's try that. Let's try that. Let's see. Where do I go? Where's the? Where's my? You can only edit the name.
Hmm.
Where's my? Sorry, this isn't like Zoom. Oh wait, excuse
Yeah.
me. There we go. Okay, video input. There we are.
Okay.
Easy fix.
There we are. How you doing tonight, Dan?
Pretty good. Been looking forward to this all week. I'm
Awesome.
working full time in an office. I've escaped the precariat, and but that means that it means a few things. A, it means that I can actually listen to things and other audio content while I work, which means I'm I'm going to be a bit more caught up on things, including other podcasters and other YouTube stuff.
That's always nice.
And let's see, the other thing it means is that I'm just wicked tired. At least for now. I mean, it's starting to get more of a routine. And some time there'll be a second person who supports staff. Otherwise, I'm basically just filing. I'm filing. But
Cool.
it's the office that does the building permits for all the school districts in the
Oh
U.S.
wow. Wow. Very
So
cool.
any memes you see about buildings falling over or shoddy construction, there's a reason there's all these layers of red tape and review that happen. Got to make sure those school buildings don't kill some kids,
Yeah, you would hope that
including
that's a minimum standard.
and can I don't know if it's our place, but someone was asking if we had the authority to deal with a school's heat was off and they hadn't sent the kids home. The administrators
Oh,
were apparently, according to the parent, coping with it.
coping with it.
Telling the kids to put more clothes on, and they were distributing. Teachers were bringing space heaters. At least that's what the phone call was saying. But that's probably could be more proprietary information. I don't know. But otherwise, on to the topic. So
Yes.
this is bread theory, and like many other content makers, covering theory, covering old texts of thinking about politics. Very little in content, and I'm not just talking about recently. I'm talking about always a lack of content for how to organize, how to do
Absolutely.
politics,
Absolutely.
and usually it's implied, I guess, that you learn by doing. It's a very do learn by doing approach with the basis of theory, where you start with like your ideology and your motivation, which is kind of how I went with, and then you
Mhm.
start doing, and it's like you're an intern until you either get paid to do politics, or it's always just part of your life as a hobby, or but like
Gotcha.
can it only be your profession if you're being paid by a nonprofit or an
Yeah.
organization. And but really, we do need people to be professionals paid by an organization. Unfortunately, political organizations are always nonprofits that are funded by some type of bourgeois person, whether
Right.
they be um, a billionaire or just your local millionaire, nice liberal person who
Yep.
maybe doesn't like seeing homeless people, but will certainly not um, change democratic priorities to funding
Mhm.
public housing.
Right.
But how can we work in the market anyway? So I found my friend who's also on a school board, but he has a
Mhm.
bookshop. He's an antique book dealer, and he clears out many houses of old people or the deceased book collections. And in that,
Wow.
so we came across the Action Course in Practical Politics. Now, this is like the thing you get in an MLM where, like, you sign up for a course on self improvement
Mhm.
or some other thing. But obviously, there's political versions of this, which usually don't get the rounds on TikTok or YouTube as much. But
Sure.
really, they do exist. But you kind of have to be an organization first, and then there's Zoom call training sessions, or you go to a conference for training, doing workshops, and you do we call it various the skill building exercises.
Sure.
How to facilitate, how to and these are things that we could do that I propose that with this and going forward that I do these kinds of workshops with you and your audience to get this
That
out
sounds
there.
fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, it's because it's kind of been a project on my mind for the last decade, since Occupy,
Mhm.
something I wanted to do because Occupy was like an activist boot camp. You could go
Right.
to this centralized, not quite organization, but let's say anarchist organization, and you would basically get trained in a bunch of different skills to do. You're doing politics there
Mhm.
because you weren't just thinking or talking about it; you were doing it. And but there's no curriculum for it as much.
Sure.
Or every organization makes their own, and that's a lot of time that is usually if an org is actually kind of doing what it's supposed to and say organizing tenants or trying to elect someone, it's like you never ready to prepare to
Mhm.
you're never fully trained to do a good job. So there's always a lot of fear in whether it's a baby leftist or even someone like myself. I don't feel prepared to run a campaign until you
Really?
just do it and fail.
Uh-huh.
Well, I mean, I'm just saying it intersects with the immaturity of like I'm afraid to fail and try new things.
Gotcha.
Like let's say ice skating.
Mhm.
Teenagers hate trying new things because they're going to look foolish the first few times they're doing it.
Everybody does. Yes.
Right, but the sign of a mature person is that they are not afraid of failure. They know it's actually
Mhm.
part of learning, and that goes for doing politics as well as learning it. But so what else? What kind of other preface? But otherwise, I think the preface itself is in the booklet itself. So this is a set of 8 pamphlets, and they are published by the National Chamber of Commerce.
National
So,
Chamber of
so
Commerce.
we can obviously substitute whenever they talk. They mention this is like for the business person because see in the
Right.
50s there was this thing called organized labor. I know it
That
seems
is
such
foreign
like
concept today.
foreign
Yes.
something that like we can't imagine such a thing existing. But organized labor actually had quite a lot of political power. Had the Democrats in their pocket, and that's why the myth of Democrats still being in the pocket of organized labor
Mhm.
is still in the mind of the right and moderate imagination because they're still
Yep.
remembering that echo of that.
For sure.
And so this is like so I'm going to start reading. And you can feel free to stop me and
Sure.
chime in with any comment. I may comment myself, but I'm mostly going to start. So part one is the individual in politics.
Very cool.
All right. This is the first in a series of 8 pamphlets that are a basic part of an action course in practical politics. The course is described briefly in the last section of this pamphlet. It is developed by the Chamber of Commerce of the United States in response to requests from its members, local and state Chamber of Commerce's, trade and professional associations, individual business firms, and businessmen, because businesswomen didn't exist, for material they could use to help increase the political awareness and effectiveness of businessmen. Politics. So first subtitle: Politics shapes government. In a free society, the line between politics and government is difficult to define. Politics profoundly shapes the character of government, and government profoundly affects every individual in the U.S. at the local and all levels. Government, in turn, shapes politics. Of course, this course, however, distinguishes between government and politics, as I do myself. Politics, essentially, is the process of selecting, nominating, and or electing the men and women who, they include women, as representatives of the citizens, manage the public affairs of the nation at the local, state, and national levels. Government is the actual management of those affairs. An incident illustrates both, and so thus, it's assumed in American politics that once we've selected the representatives, that politics should basically not take into account the management. Say, they're in their management, like they're playing politics, like they're still doing politics, the selecting process, even when they're supposed to be managing things. We've already selected them, so they should stop playing politics. That's this line of like they're playing politics by taking positions on things. Like, okay.
Right.
So government is the actual management of those affairs. An incident illustrates both the difference between politics and government and the relationship between them. A businessman asked the administrative assistant to a U.S. senator about the probable fate of a bill which the business community generally regarded as economically unsound. It was probably something regulating health insurance, maybe. I don't know.
Could be.
Who knows? The aide replied, "The senator is against the bill. He will oppose it on the floor of the Senate, but I am afraid he is not going to get much help. The bill will pass by a substantial majority." As the businessman turned to leave, the senator's aide added, "The trouble with most businessmen is that they are not doing very much in politics. If they would get active and get some people elected who would pay some attention to them, there might be a different story when a bill like this comes along." Quote, "Businessmen neglect politics and then deplore the passage of unsound legislation." Excuse me, I just ate dinner. Okay.
No problem.
I'm going to take a drink. But you may treat me like the audiobook. Okay. Many forces affect government. The basic philosophy and attitudes of the American people ultimately determine the solutions to critical governmental questions, such as, what is the proper dividing line between government and private action? What should be the relationship between the states and local communities and the national government? What forms of taxation will best allow maximum economic growth? As if we need that, but let me adjust my camera. I feel like I'm getting cut off.
Sure.
But government is also shaped by the philosophies of those who are selected. Oh, wait, hold on. Every individual has a responsibility for studying basic issues such as these, for observing and analyzing the operations of government, and for expressing informed views on proposed government proposals and actions to his friends and neighbors, and to those who have been elected to conduct his government for him. I think all of us lefties are pretty good at that already. It's what we kind of concentrate on.
Mm-hmm.
But government is also shaped by the philosophies of those who are selected, nominated, and elected by their fellow citizens to represent them. These translate the views of the majority into specific governmental action. Inevitably, their own views color that translation. A look at any given Congress, for example, will disclose many senators and reps who have followed a conservative philosophy, Others have been just as consistently liberal. Each of them has chosen to build his character around basic articles of faith. Now, this, of course, is coming from a electoralist slash bourgeois liberal point of view.
Absolutely.
So obviously, if you're a direct action anarchist, none of this, I think, but it's still, this is still a point of view to consider as far as like what it's saying about politics itself. So to many people,
I was gonna say, especially at the local level too, like, sure, we don't have a lot of control over national politics, any of us on the left, but you could have some control over local, and it still, there still may be ordinances and things that stand in the way of you organizing how you want to.
Yeah. So I mean, I covered on my channel when this one communist got elected to a local council, but he did so as a Democrat, I guess. And he was basically he had to resign, mostly because of some edgy tweets. Where he talked to bringing a knife to an event or something like that. Or sorry, he posed with a knife and said, like, this is my Nazi cutting knife, or something like that.
Oh my God.
Yeah. But he also didn't like fight back when he was basically being trolled by this guy who was like, he was the one publishing. Anyway, go look at my YouTube channel for that clip. It's like communist resigns from like office, elected but resigns. Okay. Too many people tend to brush off the actions of Congress or of state legislators or of county councils with the phrase, "It's all politics." What do they mean? They could mean a congressman voted for a bill because he thought approval of the measure would gain votes among his constituents. A state legislator voted against a bill that was opposed by some influential groups because he knew they would support him in the next campaign for re-election. A member of a county council paid what is commonly called a political debt stemming from support he received in a previous campaign. The adage that the first duty of a politician is to be re-elected is based on hard realities, but its significance is easily misinterpreted. It does not necessarily mean politicians lack integrity. Many politicians have developed the fine art of compromise on the unessential while adhering steadfastly to the principles in which they believe. Now, aside, it's like, okay, what do you consider unessential? One person's unessential is another person's life and death.
You gotta have, yeah, absolutely.
The other thing I would point out is, but I do like the whole, like, I mean, this is part of market ideology as well, that playing tit for tat and doing what like is asked of you, or do like paying off debts and whatever, that this is all things that are considered to be part of having integrity. If you follow market forces, that's actually the thing that is integritous, while being a bleeding heart and following compassionate actions and doing what isn't profitable is considered to be lacking in integrity, at least towards
letting your emotions get in the way.
You're right. You're a woman then,
Yeah.
So none of them can ignore elections, however. Politicians are a cross-section of America. Some are good, some are bad, some are indifferent, some are opportunists, and others will not compromise their principles. Like other Americans, they want to keep their jobs or get better ones. We can never just be, content.
Right, yeah.
Like other Americans. Yeah. All Americans they just want to get richer and richer. Yeah. Okay, the county attorney wants to be governor. The governor would like to go to the Senate. Many senators would not be adverse to sitting in the White House. Despite some very human ambitions, however, many politicians with a sound economic philosophy have had the courage in their campaigns for re-election or re-election to advance this philosophy with all the vigor and sincerity at their command. Perhaps they won, perhaps they lost. If they lost, a soul-searching question is in order. Could they have won if politically non-active men of management had known how to be politically effective? Now, this is about like talking about you, the rising PMC or what have you, or bourgeois small business owner, which now can exist thanks to the New Deal and the expanding American economy thanks
Mhm.
to the destruction of the competition, at least for the next 15 years.
Mhm.
Okay. Could a great majority of people today are political? So this is what's striking me. So this is something that was like I have another book that was written in the 80s about middle class individualism in America and how Americans view government as a service. That just like any other business they go to, they want prompt service and they see it as a service that should come to them.
Right.
And this is a philosophy that any politician, the consensus adopted this, that on the city and county and national level, it's like the government has to come to you. You don't have to be active, an active citizen. People expect that government comes to them the same way, and they have to advertise to them in the same way that a beer company does, or
I
what
see.
have you, or insurance. Anyway, so, but this is back in the 50s. This is even written that a great majority of people today are political consumers. Their votes are the currency with which they buy the packaged candidates and platforms
Mm.
of one party or the other. They do
Mm.
not help determine to any appreciable extent what goes into those packages.
Mhm.
Now he's talking about the people who are inactive, apathetic, or what have you. They're
Right.
not politically active.
Yeah.
This pamphlet is all about saying how to be. So to become more than a consumer in politics, which we should be screaming to the rooftops, because just watching even us or YouTube
Mhm.
is just still more consumption.
Right,
Which
right.
kind of why Peter Coffin goes crazy and whatever. Those that are like taking a position that like we can't just be political consumers, but I still won't join an organization and be active anyway.
Does make
They
sense.
do not help determine to any okay. So to become more than a consumer in politics, it is necessary to know something about how politics is organized and how it operates. This action course in practical politics presents such background info. It will be especially helpful to those who say, in effect, I want to be politically active, but how? Where do I start? What can I do? Political activity is not an end in itself. Although many people have made careers out of politics, the average man must inevitably regard politics as a means to an end. The end is good government, government that will promote the general welfare of the nation, government that is broadly representative of all interests and all groups. Now, as lefties, we would say general welfare of humanity or the world.
Mhm.
Um, Government is managed by people selected, nominated, elected through a political process. The rules and regs, the laws passed by these men affect the health and expansion of the economy, the fiscal solvency of the nation, the proportion of an individual's income that is taken in taxes, the way the tax money is spent. This is all ignoring MMT.
Well, for sure.
Every individual who abdicates his, by the way, and that's another topic. I'm not a full
Right.
MMTer, but
Was
whatever.
that even a theory in the 50s? I mean, and like
Maybe there's an
MMT.
inkling of it, but
Yeah,
MMT is pretty recent, like
that's
the
what I
80s
thought.
onward.
Right, right.
I just want to point out that many in the Green Party don't like take it as gospel.
Sure.
We would
Well, it's
still
more of a
like to cut the military
yeah, yeah.
and oh, sorry. So instead of just saying that the Fed should just keep printing money, that we would want to nationalize the Fed so that money printing is something that is in the public's control. So
Right,
anyway,
yeah, that makes sense.
um, which isn't the same thing apparently. Let's see. Right. So every individual who advocates his political responsibilities to other more politically active individuals and groups should remember the admonition of Teddy Roosevelt. If decent people do not like the way politicians behave, they should either get into politics or refrain from complaining about it. Funny but joke about Teddy Roosevelt. So you have some neo Nazis, and they got a time machine. They go back in time to kill FDR.
Mhm.
And wait, did I tell this joke last time? I probably did.
I don't think
Yeah.
so.
Okay, so they go back in time, but then
Start again.
they go back too far, and they have to fight the wrong Roosevelt.
Oh, no. He's a
Okay,
tougher guy too. He's the bull moose. So
exactly. It's a joke I'm relating from comic form. It's a comic where it's like there's a big teddy. It's like, I do declare you don't attack the wrong Roosevelt. Anyway, government represents all groups. Here's where it gets a little more idealistic, maybe. Our society is composed of many groups with varying interests: geographic, economic, ethnic, religious, and social. The authors of the Constitution felt that the views of all these groups should be represented in government to obtain a final result acceptable to the majority without trampling on the basic rights of any minority, unless you happen to be black. A candid thinking businessman once said, "The growth and use by one special interest group of political power, which has no effective check, is not the fault primarily of those who achieve the power, for it is their right to try. Rather, the fault is primarily on the part of those who, by their inactivity and silence, allowed it to happen." In his book, You're the Boss, Ed Flynn, longtime Democratic political leader, said this about complaints directed at the political influence of the CIO, Political Action Committee, which is the forerunner of the Committee on Political Education for the AFL-CIO. If the citizens whose interests are different from or broader than those championed by the PAC would take as much pains to protect those interests as labor is taking to protect its interests, the story might be an entirely different one. Certainly, there is no point in condemning PAC-endorsed candidates for feeling under obligation to organize labor. Unfortunately, however, the citizen with broad interests is rarely a party worker or even an active citizen. Why, therefore, should he be surprised that more independent candidates are not elected to office? It would be a fine thing if all office holders felt under obligation to all types of citizens and hence based their judgments on the rules of the greatest long-term good for the greatest number. But we will never reach that utopia unless or until all citizens resolve to work 365 days a year at being citizens. Now, aside here, that it's almost kind of victim blame, because obviously a worker who's overburdened,
right,
who has no free time, they can't work at being a citizen. They are disenfranchised, they're denizens. And liberal democracy, basically, it's not so much a habit of its political philosophy, but it's the economic stupid that determine that half the country will be denizens and the other half can be maybe pseudo citizens, with 10% being actual citizens.
Right.
That, foundations provide the funds to allow some working class or people to be full-time citizens in the form of being activists. Or you have a minority of people who are actual political actors of the left, and they do it in their spare time, and it's very, very difficult if they have children. Some people like Howie Hawkins, I don't think he has I don't know how much of a family he has. I've never met them, but maybe he just keeps them completely separate because they're not part of his political life. So a bit more here. The individual in politics. Two important features of politics in the U.S. increase the opportunities for effective political action by individuals. So here's what's important. Politics is organized group action. Okay, so side, it's not posting. It's not
it's not memeing, you sure?
It's not memeing, it's not one-off volunteer. I mean, I guess one-off volunteering does count if you're doing it in an organized fashion. But there's a lot of activism that is just one person writing an angry letter or doing something. Obviously a lone wolf activist is a poor one,
Right.
and it's local, or at least it starts locally.
Always has to start local.
These two facts must inevitably shape any action course in practical politics. So let's cover politics as organized group action. Any individual who wants to increase his or her political effectiveness must start with the realization that politics is organized. It's not something that's done as a consumer. That's just an individual thing. Okay. Candidates have been nominated and elected in the past without their, I'm going to switch to gender neutral pronouns if I can think of it.
Sure.
So their active support. The people who represent him will continue to be selected through that process, whether they participate or not. And this is kind of in arguments about whether anarchists should be participating in elections or not. All of this has been rehashed out. But so in the U.S., politics revolves around the two major political parties. Now, I disagree with that, but rather it is an effective, practical reality that it revolves around the two major parties. But this is ignoring that third parties have determined the course of American history.
They absolutely have, yeah.
I think the implicit fear or rejection of third-party politics, if you actually get down to it, like especially when people who are afraid of, say, the civil war between righties and lefties, like say a Tim Pool type, all those sensible moderates, are that and why even though they crow about the need for a third party, they'll never actually support one.
For sure.
Is that the last time you had a third party actually win the presidency, that's what caused the Civil War. That was the last time. Like it made compromise or the continuation of the status quo and reform. It made it impossible because the third party had won. It didn't win with more than half. You don't need to win with more than half if you're a third party. You only need a third, if even. And that's what Abraham Lincoln won with. And that's the thing about Abraham Lincoln, greatest president. First time he won, it wasn't with more than half. It wasn't a plurality. And that's what led to the secessionists taking the action they did. That the crazy radicals had won the election, and they weren't going to stand for that. Because they knew that these crazy radicals were actually going to come for their slaves, just as liberals want to come for their guns or whatever, or lefties want to come for their toothbrush.
Let's want to force feed CRT to their children.
Right. So if a socialist party or even a labor party won, there would be some kind of civil war of some type. Wouldn't be the same form at all. But since so many want to avoid that, it seems to lead to me in cycle after cycle to a paralyzing inaction of not wanting to stray from the duopoly token.
So you think it would cause that much of an existential threat?
Yes, I believe so.
A similar threat
because let's say a People's Party or a labor/lefty party actually won the presidency. We got 30% of the vote or something. And there was some other independent and moderate candidate, and the other two major parties had their clown show. And we won with 30% or something, or 33%. And that would be an existential challenge to America, because that lefty candidate would be saying, we're going to cut the military. We're going to cut back the empire. Just remember that Abraham Lincoln did not run on ending slavery. He only ran on limiting it. And that was enough of an existential crisis to start to secede. If we won with a candidate who was not an outward socialist or communist even, but someone like Bernie Sanders, if he did win, it would be just as much of an existential challenge. But Abraham Lincoln did not run as a Democrat, or in his case, a Whig.
A Whig, yeah.
Yeah, the Whigs were the let's reform or limit slavery was the best they could do. No, let alone reforming slavery. But but the fact that they were so bad, like they could not even reform slavery. There was no option to. Just as the Democrats cannot reform labor or capitalism. Um, there needs to be this third option that would be that if people got over this mental block of being afraid of conflict, and apparently,
Mhm,
at
mhm.
the time there was enough people were ready to end slavery. Ready, they wanted to end slavery enough that they would fight for it, and
Right.
that many millions of Americans would volunteer to
Mhm.
protect the Union because they knew as they were going volunteering that they were fighting to end slavery. We have to be willing to die,
Mhm.
um, morbidly, but we're in a different century, and we can maybe, even though the existential crisis will be lead to some kind of strife, it will not be the same scale. I think we can accept, we can internalize that we don't have to actually, we're not going to have to run into a machine gun nest or face down a helicopter or gunship.
Mhm.
Um, maybe an
Just
NRAP,
mm,
maybe an NRAP, maybe the National Guard, but that's totally different. Because the point is with the American Civil War, it was the military was split in half, so it's not like you
right.
have to face the whole American military.
I
Maybe,
couldn't really imagine that happening today, though, that the even different branches of the military would end up picking sides like that. So
yeah, it would be
it's
entirely different.
difficult to
I want to make
imagine.
that clear. I'm not
Yeah,
making any kind of like prediction. I'm
one-to-one
just saying
comparison.
that if politics were challenged in the way that in the same way. So all of this is just coming off of this recognition that like of the duopoly, that this is
Yeah,
how
yeah.
it's done, and if you're going
Okay.
to be practical, you're going to participate that way. To say that you're going to do otherwise, even though that has been part of American history, twice, at least twice in American history,
But
it's
just
not to.
quickly before we move on, though, um, what then is really the hope for a third party if that's the case? If we have this history of third parties breaking apart the country, and we don't really have much of a hope of getting to a parliamentary system instead, where third parties can coexist. What's the hope of a third party to?
Well, my challenge to lefties,
Mhm.
if you say you're revolutionary or you're you're a reformer, even, that you have to accept that you have to break what's, or not break what's broken. Um, just accept that you're going to be disruptive.
Okay, so
And I think
just
so much of the argument when it comes to electioneering
mhm.
is that we can't, despite saying like we're like we want to change things the most, that we're actually going to disrupt things the least. I find that maybe that's a paradox to overcome. That it's like, look, we want Biden to win because he's actually going to return things to normal, and that's harm reduction. And because we don't want this disruption that hurts people. And if that's the case, then you're not really for change.
Right,
Then that means we have more work to do.
right.
But we have to accept that we're looking out to disrupt things
So we have
more
to be
than, yeah,
willing
more
to
than
risk the
anything,
entire system collapsing in order to achieve what we want.
because we hate the system.
Well,
If you don't, then you
I
don't
certainly do.
really.
Yeah,
So yeah, so that's why I'm sharing this with you,
sure.
my comrade, and with fellow comrades, and that's kind of where the starting point is. I hate the system. I hate slavery enough that I will risk the country tearing itself apart,
Okay.
knowing
All right.
that with the work and the sacrifice, it can be whole again, better than before. And that's,
Not bad. I like that.
yeah,
That's a good place to start from.
okay.
And I hope that answers your question, Captain 42 there in the chat. We are leftists because we dislike the system. We think it's not full on slavery, but it definitely is wage slavery. It limits people's options, their freedom, their chance to participate democratically. We live in a bourgeois democracy at best, where unless you're rich, it's hard to even run for office or Yeah, that's why I said it's not quite slavery. Wage slavery is not quite slavery, but you still have very limited options in your life. The number one determinant of where you end up in America is where you start out economically.
Well, it used to be that child slavery isn't as bad as serfdom,
Right. Exactly. Yeah, there's always
or
gradients
whatever,
of control, but we
or
want to
this, or the
move.
state of nature that the blacks were found in.
Yeah. So we want to move to even freer society where people actually do have control, where anyone can choose to be part of the government and is not held back by, just baseline survival and scrambling to put enough food on the table and stuff like that.
Okay, so back to the practical here.
Yeah.
Many of the framers of the Constitution were fearful. Sorry, that's my speech impediment coming up. Of political parties and warned against them, but their development was inevitable. Even if they were not essential in our form of government, political parties would have developed. It has been said that, quote, if politics was not organized, someone would come along and organize it. So this is, and maybe that's a challenge to horizontal anarchists or anarchist post-left anarchist, actually. No, just post-leftists overall. Post-leftists seem to believe that you don't have to organize, or if you do, you're not doing it as any. It's hard to pin down what they really believe, I guess. Anyway, so defects in the okay. As long as people have different views on basic questions of government, those with similar views will join together, recognizing that in union there is strength.
Absolutely.
Defects in the political system, as it has grown up in the United States, is a favorite subject of political scientists. Many books have analyzed the growth and operation of political parties and have recommended improvements. Improvements that are probably usually never followed. Because even now, even in the last decade, there have been books published on how to reform this or that part of American government to avoid, I don't know, Trump as president back, in 2010 or something like that from happening. But of course, none of it was followed, so it happened. So anyway, of this course is not concerned with such value judgments. It accepts as basic premise that political parties do exist, that they are already organized to perform a major political role in our system, and that to be effective, a beginner in politics must relate their activities to party organization. In fact, the existence of political parties offers real advantages to the beginner in politics. It means he does not have to embark alone on an uncharted sea, as many wannabe activists do. That's my words. Political parties are composed of millions of workers. There is a niche for him if he wants it. Second part, politics is local. As he casts his first tentative glances at political participation, the beginner can easily make the age-old mistake of concentrating on the forest instead of the trees. He recognizes the fact that political parties play a dominant role in politics, but he is inclined to think of them in terms of a national election, which is what I bang my head against the wall when it comes to content on YouTube, is that it's always concerned with the national. As far a far removed national committee composed of party leaders with statewide and national reps, he would be less than human if he did not wonder how he could make an appreciable impact on such a system, which is why so many do nothing. They watch the regular news about national politics, and it does feel, it's always overwhelming, and it feels like, what could I do? Even with the Bernie campaign, it's like, what could I do except give him $28 and so on and so on. Captain 42 is not listening to us. He is
Of course not.
not participating in unless he's willing to type out in a paragraph form, thank you, please and thank you, what his political, like, I don't know, positions are on strategy or tactics.
Mhm.
So The beginner, even as the professional in politics does, should concentrate on the individual trees, the precinct, the ward, the town, the city. Political parties are composed of thousands of individual political organizations. In the final analysis, the success of the party depends upon the effectiveness of these orgs. That elections are won and lost in the precincts is a political truism. A handful of votes can change the result in many local elections. Even the majorities that run into millions in a presidential election are built up one vote at a time. Anyone becomes effective in politics just as soon as he becomes effective in politics in their own community. So I find this part really important, because even when you have organizations, even including Green Party, DSA, and others that maybe you can think of, they have national orgs. They still go from the top down. The Green Party is not really, they're more like middle out, as Biden would say. They started as state chapters, and that goes for the Movement for a People's Party or any other group that wants to do national, like wants to affect national politics. They usually start with state chapters. But could we ever have an org that actually like starts on the block level, on the neighborhood level? Not even on the city level. You have DSA chapters that are cities, but even on the city level, things are still really big, and you don't win anything on the city level without neighborhood orgs on your side.
There you go. That's
and
what
so
I'm
you
talking about.
Now I'm speaking as someone. I'm not making it sound easy. I hope I'm not making it sound easy, because I myself have participated in my local neighborhood association, and it's tough, man. Mostly because it's not an org I started, but I was participating in a group of people who are property owners, just basic liberal politics, and working under the rubric of like this action course, but not quite Democratic Party functionaries either, both independent of that, thus not really having an impact on the local Democratic Party, who is the government. But simply acting as lobbyists for the interest group, being the neighborhood.
Sure. Yeah.
And doing 2 neighborhood cleanups and maybe some social mixer now and then. This is not, to me, it wasn't doing politics, but it did all the things that you're supposed to, at least like on the surface. Like the person who ran it would canvass with leaflets on the whole neighborhood every month for the meeting, because that was like part of her job. She wasn't like a political professional, but she works for a nonprofit, so she has extra time to go out and not so much door knock, but leaf drop.
Yeah.
And for the monthly meetings, but monthly meeting attendance would still be really sparse, because if your family people aren't coming, and people who aren't familiar with the neighborhood aren't coming, or people who aren't interested aren't coming. But she would also not have clear agendas on these flyers.
That can be important too. Yeah.
Usually, you draw people to local meetings by having guests, a speaker, or just the mayor or the police chief or something. This is what they think. This is how they think anyway. I would suggest having actual like speakers about like how to develop the neighborhood or this or that.
Sure.
But my local group wasn't really doing real programs to me. They were just they were acting as lobbyists, and the meeting was to discuss what we should ask city government for, and it wasn't about doing things ourselves in any way. Why? Because we lacked resources and we weren't willing to fundraise for them, or I wasn't willing to. And because I was only putting 10%, I was only putting in 10% effort admittedly, but so to not have my experience where I'm just the only millennial there as well, banging my head on the table, is to actually put in all of your effort into the local group that you start or join, and be committed to that. And that's your project, have your project. My local project is community radio station, which does cover the city, but it's based in one neighborhood, so it does kind of act as a program of that neighborhood.
Like a super local focus.
Yeah, as far as the people who are involved,
That's great.
who run it, as well as like the mayor of the block. Abdul is his name, and we involve him sometimes. So, do you want to? Let me just finish the last paragraph here.
Sure.
Mechanics of politics. Most individuals have definite opinions on the type of government that is most conducive to the development of this country and the well-being of all its inhabitants. Many of them, however, have not taken the time to study the mechanics of politics that will help them achieve better government. They may not understand how candidates are selected for public office, how politics is organized, how a political campaign is run, where political clubs fit into the political picture, how a precinct leader is selected, and what they do. This course is concerned with those mechanics. It provides insights into the many different ways individuals can be active in politics, and explains how they can use their skills and knowledge most effectively in political activity. So it lays out the 8 parts, and it's like a bunch of workshops, which of course don't exist anymore. And then it has its very extensive bibliography, which a lot of pamphlets don't have. But it also includes a list of all the major party publications as they existed back then.
That's cool.
Wait, actually, okay, this isn't from the 50s. It has things listed here from 64.
Oh, interesting.
Let me check again. Let me check the published date on this. It says its copyright is 59, but
maybe this was a later edition or something.
Later printing.
Yeah.
So why don't we take a break and go through the chat? Maybe respond.
Yeah, no problem.
And discuss your reaction to what I just read.
Oh, my reaction to what we just read. I don't know. I'm having trouble.
Yeah, take your time. Why don't we go through the chat? And,
we can go through the chat first, though. So we had a troll in earlier who was very mad at us for not liking the current system and very quick to cheerlead for the likes of Bezos and Jobs and stuff like that.
Oh, is that what they were doing? I wasn't reading
That's what they were doing. They're like,
He said his last thing was, "I'm left wing, but you people are brain damaged."
Yeah, basically.
Oh, but then he says you leftists are just trolling. Okay.
But I always find it funny when they really are big on. It's usually Elon Musk stands that you get, but sometimes you get the other so-called great men of history and stuff.
He started with "What's up, kids?"
Yeah, right.
We're 30 guy.
But yeah, it's a dumb idea to worship these sorts of narratives, because you look into any of these guys' past and they always have had some sort of thing that's not available to normal people. Whether it's Donald Trump's loan of a small loan of a couple $1 million from his father, whether it's Elon Musk coming from an emerald mine owning family. There's always something in there that's given them an extra leg up, and they've always had a lot of time to and space and money to develop their ideas that most people just don't have. So it's dumb hero worship, and it doesn't look good.
Let's say hi to Nathan.
Yeah, Nathan, good to see you.
Who I never feel McCarthyism. Well, I do feel McCarthyism gets us down in that in its effectiveness, that, like, say you'll encounter people who talk of how, like, look, I get a balanced media diet. I watch Fox and CNN.
Yeah, like, wow, all the major networks.
I listen to the left and the right.
Right.
That's what they say. And or you point out how bullshit that is. It's like, okay, so where do you go for news? I would start with the AP. The AP is like the ultimate in just the facts, no bias, just reporting.
Yeah.
Now, yeah, there is a sincere lack of reporting. I like this. I want to point out something I read or heard, that the truth is the inner, like that, in the question of subjectivity versus objectivity, that everything is subjective as far as you have a subjectivity and I have a subjectivity and the black woman has a subjectivity. Truth lies in the intersection of these various objectivities. That's where objectivity lies. So we need a way you cross reference between multiple reports that are have some type of integrity attached to it that isn't just plain bullshit or lies, not
Yeah.
coming from the Veritas project or whatever.
Let's hope not.
Right. But it's like if there's no objectivity, how you prove Veritas is lying?
I mean,
Because
other than the
there's all
fact
these
they've been caught so many times in their own
that
lives.
right. There's other reports to cross reference, and that's what
Right.
makes it true.
Right.
Or something true versus not true. So the problem with those that are, untruthful or form their belief systems based on lies is that they're only working off of one subjectivity. Maybe it's just theirs, and maybe it's theirs plus a Murdoch press corps or a billionaire stooge. Billionaire stooge. Um, so what you want are reports from someone who's working class. You want a report from a reporter, environmental reporter, a sports reporter, a labor reporter, and then if they don't have to be saying the same thing, but you just cross reference the what's in common, what objectivity can be found here. So that's
Right.
that's something to keep in mind.
Absolutely.
So,
What are other sources that you like besides the AP, personally?
Well, I'm just talking. Yeah, see, I'm bringing this up because I have trouble answering it completely. I
Mm-hmm.
can just point out that just try to describe what my media diet looks like, which is
Right.
part YouTube, Twitch streamer, some of it trash, some of it not. But like you have like someone like President Sunday, that's this
Mm.
paragon of integrity to me, as far as like when he thinks through things in a very like because he knows the philosophy of
President Sunday.
President Sunday. If you haven't heard of him, he's like he takes epistemology super seriously, which is the study of how you know things. And he takes it seriously enough that when he talks about what he knows or what you can know or not know, it's like there's an authoritarian, like it has an authority, not authoritarian, but there's an authenticity there that I think I haven't found elsewhere as of yet. Because he's got like a doctorate in political science. So he has gaps in his like expertise, like with economics and stuff. But like he's like this master of chopping down like, and he argued with Vosh in a way that was just the most interesting. Like he really like went toe to toe with Vosh about calling out the way he deals with knowledge and
That's great.
how he knows things. And Vosh is just kept going back to like his usual vagueness with like this or that. I can't
Mhm.
really describe it well because it was and
It's great to see when it happens because Vosh is so good at rhetoric that oftentimes, even if he's unfamiliar with the subject, he can get around that just by making the other person look stupid or, you know, probing their philosophy
for
enough that it breaks down or something like
for
that.
example, your recent post from the serfs
Oh yeah.
on the modern day debates,
Oh
which are neither modern nor debates.
no, it's mostly just a shouting fest of
And they're
insults
not
and
during the day either,
garbage.
so it's a triple lie. It's like the Holy Roman Empire.
I feel really bad for James, the moderator. He seems like a good guy who really wants to put out good stuff, but
He
he
should
just
learn how to he should learn how to moderate.
should learn to be a professional moderator because
He
he
should learn
almost
how to moderate.
moderator is almost an honorific at this point. He
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
he just lets things happen. Like the one that you're talking about involved about 2 straight hours of Haas, also known as infrared, just being as vicious as possible to Destiny, everything out of the closet. And getting down to like, do you really think that you're the more attractive streamer of the two of us? And it went so incredibly personal, and
but
even out of the
entertaining, which is why he does it.
entertaining, which is why he does it. Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's why he does it. Now, of course, I'm going to not defending the guy, of course, or how not the guy, but the character, let's say. But Dylan and Destiny are also characters.
Oh, for
They're
sure.
smarmy liberals that
Yeah.
make me cringe just as much with the way they talk about things, and they consistently. And then when they acted this way, they would say because they're working with a bad faith actor. I get that.
Mm-hmm.
But again, if everyone's acting like a bad faith, their opponent, that's the problem there too. But the person they're talking to is a bad faith actor, an opponent who needs to be beaten or made a fool, then of course it's just like you're basically watching a verbal boxing match, and it's can be entertaining, but it's obviously you don't learn anything from it whatsoever. I would not. So what I'm saying is I learned a lot more from President Sunday about the Ukraine situation because he would really look over what was real or not. Meanwhile, I'm going to like say a place like Status Coup, which is the channel of a guy named Jordan Charlton. And he was a reporter for the Young Turks, but they fired him. Mixture of a sexual harassment allegation that didn't go anywhere, and not towing Czech Uyghur's line, or as this is the way
seems to be
Jordan
the end of a
described
lot
it.
of people. Yeah,
And this is Jordan's side of it anyway. That he wanted to do more on the ground reporting, particularly about the water in Flint, and the Young Turks just didn't want to keep funding that. And I think there was especially the change in 2016 when they took like a few $billions and basically needed to toe the Clinton machine's line on things. So that's when a lot of people jumped ship. Jeremy Dore jumped ship, and Jordan was part of that too.
no loss there, but
but Jordan doesn't like Dore either. But because Jordan is a reporter, his flaw is that when he's interviewing people on the beat, like at an event, usually a Trump rally of some kind, Trump event, he argues with them. He's not interviewing them; he's arguing with them. He's acting
there
like
to present a narrative.
Yeah, right. He agitates. Yeah. Now, if he's at an actual, basically like he's not taking these people seriously as activists because they're not real activists. When he's at an action with activists, he is interviewing them. Mm-hmm. But yes, he also does present a narrative. He has his biases. At the same time, he's like, I'm Mr. Serious Reporter. I don't have a bias, or I don't do calls to action myself, especially when it comes to elections and whatever. But I've been paying attention to him lately, or I've returned to him because, well, now that I can listen to more stuff at work, he was covering Movement for a People's Party drams because a recent candidate of theirs resigned from their board. And but not only that, half the board of Movement for a People's Party was just fired or banned or purged. If you ask Nick Braga, who's basically the mastermind of that dumpster fire, he would say that his organization has been infiltrated by a bunch of liberals who, on the policy of vaccine mandates, want to, bring the party down, or they want to take the party in a non-progressive direction and make it a liberal party project thing. But I think that he's calling it that. What he means is these are a bunch of new age libs who oppose vaccine mandates, and they're reactionary, and they're not focused on single payer health care and the things that like the Green Party has a similar. I take him seriously in that way. In that he's struggling with the same thing the Green Party does, except we've been around longer and we actually have working institutions, at least institutions I have trust in. because in Movement for a People's Party, there are no such institutions. It's just this board of 10 people with Nick Braga basically able to
Right.
shut people out at will.
Yeah.
The thing in play is that he has a sexual assault, not assault, but harassment allegation from an ex person, an ex girlfriend, I guess. And but he is absolutely like not. When Jordan was interviewing him, that was blood sport that
Oh,
occurred. While
okay.
when he has somebody on who is telling their side of the story, they get a full hour and it's all very cordial. But I have to, wince at like, well, what are they not talking about? They keep talking
Mhm.
about how much of a dumpster fire Movement for a People's Party is, and how much they just want to organize so they can have their third party.
Mhm.
And only sometimes are they asked, why aren't you doing that with the Greens then? And it's usually a messaging issue. They don't like Green Party's brand. Like when people oppose the Greens because they say we'd have a damaged brand or something, that's the only reason why they do something else. It's so asinine to
That's
me.
silly. As though they wouldn't fall into that same category if they ever got any strength.
That's exactly. And starting from scratch means like they've gone 4 years. They're no closer to organizing than they were like in 20 when they
Oh yeah,
started in 2017.
they haven't
Um,
elected a single candidate, have they?
No, but they did endorse a Green or two.
Okay.
And they endorsed the Senate candidate who was the person who was like splitting, saying they're not affiliated with Movement for a People's Party anymore. But
Mhm.
she was running as a Dem. She was just endorsed or I don't know, involved in some way. And but yeah, they're trying to they're organized state parties, and some of them didn't even know that they didn't have to all have the same name, which is why like they're a lot of these organizers in Movement for a People's Party, they're splitting from the main org run by Nick Braga and his father, and they're realizing all the things that Greens have always known, that you can have whatever kind of name you want, you can split
Mhm.
off and do your own thing. So now there's this parallel organization called the calling it the like assembly, People's Assembly,
Oh,
and
already factionalization, huh?
I mean, is it what makes them an assembly that like? But is it based on policy, or is it just based on like? Because their complaint, their side of it, is that Nick Braga is this dictator guy and it's his baby, and he doesn't want to let go. Or if something isn't being done the way he wants, or isn't being done by him, he doesn't want it
Mhm.
to happen. Which I can believe.
Mhm.
I'm in an organization like that right now.
Sure.
Um, or you just have to check with them to make sure that they're on board before continuing. And because they're paying all the bills or something, which Nick probably feels like he has been carrying all the weight since it started. Um, but that's the problem. The Green Party didn't start with a single leader. It didn't start with a single person or spokesperson. It was a bunch of state parties that wanted to be environmental parties, and then
Mhm.
into then they formed a national committee.
Yeah.
Movement for a People's Party has always been a national committee recruiting people to organize statewide, and then continuing to want to work down. Which again is it's just it takes forever, and it feels like it's overwhelming. I feel like, but it also I don't know. We can discuss if it feels overwhelming to start on your local level, because then it kind of feels like you're not having a big impact. But but
Yeah.
small things add up to big things, you
Right.
know.
It's the snowball effect. It's got to
Yeah,
start somewhere.
and
Um,
yeah,
yeah, getting back more to the topic of tonight in the pamphlet,
yeah,
I had a thought when you were talking about how difficult it is to organize local meetings and stuff like that, where a lot of people just they're too busy. A lot of people aren't engaged. Um, it seems to me that
yeah.
any
Or you
sort of
do them, but only
organization
you get
you get a smattering of turnout, and who knows how committed they end up being, or if they're just testing it out. Um, it seems to me you might have better chance in getting people there and getting them to come back if you were to provide things like childcare while the meeting is happening. Provide a little bit of a meal. It doesn't have to be a big meal or anything, but just something so that you know the people with very limited time actually have uh, an incentive to spend it that way instead of having to cook dinner and then just rush off, get off to bed quickly.
Make every meeting a
Right.
potluck so that it's your dinner for the evening, no
Yeah,
matter what. You don't have to worry about getting dinner beforehand or after, which
absolutely.
I have an issue with. But obviously, age of Zoom, we haven't been doing that in any of the orgs I'm part of.
True.
Now and dinners out are a separate issue and a separate event. They're not meetings, though. There's usually one person who wants to make it a meeting, because if there's more people than usually show up to the Zoom calls, it's usually the same
Right.
5 people. And
Yeah.
but I never want to go to a meeting where half of the time is taken up by people complaining about how there's no one else here. That's the thing that gets me more
That's pretty
demoralized.
self-defeatist. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's not so much. It's just maybe it's the acknowledgement of like that it's only 5 of us. But to me,
Hmm.
5 people is a committee. It's like with 5
Yeah,
people we
that's
can
a
do
start.
stuff. We
Core
just
five
divvy up the
people, you can get a
task
lot
5
done.
ways, and it just seems overwhelming if, say, it's like you really like each person is taking on the task that a group should be taking
Hmm.
on. But yeah, so it's like one person's doing outreach
Right.
and one person's doing the meetings and one person. That's kind of how things is right now. But then it becomes like, okay, each person who's given a task, it's your responsibility to get one other person to help you,
Hmm.
kind of thing. And it's pressure, but it's also like you have a month, get one
Right.
other person to help you, even if it's just an hour,
Right.
or find the person who that's interested in doing that, and that way, because it's just one other person, you can have them on your phone and bug them to help you,
Let's
bug
keep
them
at
when the
it.
right time is, and
Yeah.
not feel like you have to just keep mass emailing a list of people that maybe are they even seeing the email,
Hmm.
kind of stuff like that.
Good point. Good point.
Hi.
Uh, they're saying hi to you, Amanda.
Hi.
She
Hi,
says hi.
Amanda.
Watering our many plants. It's a chore unto itself.
Well, hi,
Uh,
Will Skeptic. I'm Dan.
yeah, this is
Unless you're
Dan.
talking about Zach.
I think Wolf Skeptic probably knows me by now. He's been in the
Yeah.
chat several times. But
Hmm.
okay. So another question that arises about organizing super locally is the people that tend to have the extra time and to have put in the thought about organizing and the thought about politics and stuff like that probably are the people that tend to live more in middle class and upper class neighborhoods. So at that point, it may be difficult to. I mean, what do you organize around if people already have their needs basically met?
Yeah, that's kind of one of those contradictions with Green Party organizing, where the wards we do well in are those such wards. But then I'm thinking, like, if I'm going around to canvas, say even other Greens, like,
Hmm. Hmm.
what's their issue? I mean, they
Right.
have issues, of course. They're Greens. That means they care about something. But it's not none of it's socialist stuff, nothing, no mutual aid or whatever. They're the
Right.
people that can put in time to help with mutual aid projects. But then it's like it feels like charity because they are, they don't need it, but they're doing it. Just like how, as someone who, God, I'm not even median income in my city, but just having a 32,000 salary, I'm gonna feel rich real soon.
Wow.
But um, but it means pure than the people with actual families and kids and all these expenses that
Right. Right.
I do
Right.
not have. And so the project becomes, we need to help people meet their expenses, daycare, things that parents have to pay for daycare because of things that didn't
True.
used to be that way, like because they're multi-generational households, for example. With
Good point.
multi-generational households, you had grandparents or the childless member of the family, that would be me, who would take care of the
Hmm.
kids.
Hmm.
And technically, well, that's not the case with me right now, but let's say on the weekends, I could take the kids or some of the kids. I don't, but I could if I lived in the house or next door. I live next door to my parents, so I can help them. and whatever.
Mhm.
And so that dynamic is in play. But with most Americans, it's not. It's not even if all their family members are
Mhm.
a city away or state away because they had to chase
Sure.
where the jobs were. They had to go to metro areas. James, if you think $4 a gallon sucks,
Yeah.
just wait till it's
Just
six
just
dollars a
wait.
gallon. Now, apparently, if you recall, it was $4 a gallon back in like I don't know, it was 806. It was sometime in the aughts. It was one of the times that made Bush actually unpopular. It was when
Yeah,
his
that's true.
unpopularity
I
was
think I
starting
think
to
you're right about the time frame, yeah.
when he was like I actually have old political cartoons that depress me now because it was basically about how the suburb was going to basically be obsolete with these high gas prices. But of course, what the government will do, because our way of life is so goddamn precious, that they will find a way to get the fossil fuel companies to lower the gas price back down to 3.
Mhm.
Because $3 a gallon seems to be like the equilibrium for the American
Yeah, that's
public.
kinda what people can absorb
It can't go higher than that.
broadly,
Even though
which is
anywhere else
crazy
in the
'cause
world, it's $8 in,
right.
comparative currency. Um, to me, because I'm comparing like car driving to using a bus or taking a bus
Mhm.
somewhere or biking even. I think of like how on a good mileage vehicle, let's say it's 30 gallons a mile. I mean, sorry, 30 miles a gallon.
I gotcha, yeah. Mhm.
That that $3 gets me 30 miles. That's quite the deal to me because
That's a
30
good distance, yeah.
miles taking a bus, which will go maximum 10 miles,
Yeah,
or a bicycle, which you can do 40 miles a day, but that's if you're just cycling.
sure.
Um, but see, then this is how well the more maybe spoiled the American public is when it comes to car driving. Is they're going 20 miles. Someone mentioned a fellow radical. I'm going 20 miles each way every day or something, and I'm like, yeah, that's almost $10 that you're spending on transport. Just never mind all the maintenance and the car payment or whatever,
Yeah, yeah.
just the fuel.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah.
for me, $40 is my unlimited bus pass.
Yeah, that's a month of busing right there, yeah.
Yeah, and because I'm adding basically $20-$30 to my bus card every month,
Mhm.
and so like that's what people are spending on one tank. Now,
Right,
to me, one
right.
tank of gas in a car, so how much if I did drive, if I own my own car, to me, that's how much car driving I would do in a month.
Mhm.
I would use the car to get to places that I can't take the bus, and that would be max, 10-mile trip. So that would be 2 gallons, that's $8. So it's like, I don't know, it seems like reasonable cost to me. But it isn't
Mhm.
reasonable if it's something every day, and
Yeah,
so on. I get, I'm
yeah.
not callous in talking about this. I'm just saying that yeah, we have to organize for better urbanism to not have to spend this money, and that goes for all the other expenses people need. So yeah, it's a seems like a catch-22 every single
It
way you
sucks,
look at it.
but
But this
I
is
think there's a lot of
where you get some rich benefactors involved. And
uh-huh.
the issue that I see in some urban organizing, like with liberal, progressive nonprofits and progressive activists, is that their goals are just so limited, maybe based on their own political imagination. But they
Mhm.
can get a rich benefactor, but then they'll spend that largesse
Mhm.
on things that maybe they're constrained to do, which is just lobby state government or just fight for some regulation and not on community projects. Um, on the other hand, you do get, capitalist largesse for community projects. It's how permaculture labs are funded. You say you're going to do
Mm, mhm.
environmental education. You got to teach kids in the hood how to garden. These
Yeah,
are not these are things you can sneak radical politics in on the down low, but usually even the people doing this aren't thinking in a revolutionary way. They're not like a Black Panther Party chapter. Um, but yeah, it's a way of But you can sneak it in. Like I'm thinking about, I'm going to cover it on my show very soon when I do housing again. A permanent real estate cooperative, which is being done in Oakland right now. It's a brand new model because it's not a housing co-op. That can be like any group of people pulling money in. It's usually people that have to have means already of some kind. But a real estate co-op means that it can actually deal with property on a mass scale, which is something that housing co-ops can't do. They're limited to a few buildings, if even just one building. A real estate
Really?
co-op can do everything.
Oh,
It can have investors as well as people buying in for units, you know? So a housing co-op is usually the people who are going to live in it. So it's limited to that many people and who it affects. But a real
mhm,
estate co-op can have $1,000 investors or act like a other type of co-op. And
mhm,
then it can have investors with a very small rate of return. But that's not the point. When you invest in it, you actually want to create affordable housing. That is how we actually create affordable housing.
mhm,
We have to build something that can actually compete slash work in non-tandem is not the word, in opposition to capitalist real estate. We need socialist or community real estate, and that's how you'd
right.
frame it: community real estate for affordable
Yeah, yeah.
housing. And but really you're building socialism. You're
Mm,
doing co-op Jackson type things. So I guess to answer like how do you get around catch 22s, I guess you have to just look at the projects that are succeeding that do have reporting about them, but they haven't been blasted. They need to be covered by people like Vosh, um, like Co-op Jackson, and and Vosh should be talking to
yeah,
Co-op Jackson people.
absolutely should be.
Um, I actually heard just now that Vosh is taking some of his wealth and he's looking to endorse candidates.
That's
Um,
something.
I guess he's thinking. I guess he's making his own pack.
Okay.
But I see that a repeat of like the Mayday Pack and other such
Mm,
orgs where they're
not
not
familiar with that
parties.
one.
They're going to
Okay.
fundraise to endorse, sorry, not endorse, but fund candidates. But what metric are they going to use? And how are these candidates going to be chosen? Um, I foresee that it's not going to be an organized effort. These candidates need to be more than just one-offs or just like maybe are they socialist leaning? I don't know what it's about, but I just know parties. So if we still have if you want to continue, I can start going into part two,
Yeah, let's.
which is the political party organization. So let's see if I'm going to skip the intro, which is just about defining a party. And then this page is about how they developed. But maybe, why not?
Sure.
George Washington, in his farewell address, deplored the danger of a party system, particularly division along
Mm.
geographic lines. Yet, while Washington was still president, the Federalist Party began to form under the leadership of Alexander Hamilton, and the Democratic or Anti-Federalist Party took shape under Thomas Jefferson. Federalist group wanted a strong central government that could be controlled by, influenced by banking. They represented most business interests in the Northeast. Jeffersonian group favored strong state government and a limited national government and represented the agrarian, aka the slaveholding
The
interests,
slave South. Yeah.
and centered on the frontier areas and the South. Subsequent realignments of the parties took place on the basis of issues. The Federalists died as a national party following the defeat of Rufus King by James Monroe in 1816. By 1828, the Jacksonians had split off from the Democratic Republicans, principally over differences on tariffs and monetary policy between propertied interests on one hand and agrarians and frontiersmen on the other. Webster, Clay, and Calhoun were the founders and leaders of a new Whig party made up of various factions of the traditional Democratic Republicans and the surviving Federalists. In the 1850s, both the Whig and Democratic parties splintered over the slavery question. leading to the formation of the third party, Republicans. But they're not framed as a third party. They're just framed as a new party. Lincoln's victory in 1860 and the reduction of the Democratic Party to a Southern regional one, reduced it to a Southern regional party for many years. The parties originated and reformed on the basis of issues, but for the past 100 years, there had been two major parties with no realignment of forces successful enough to produce a new national political party. In 6 southern states, there is, for all practical purposes, a one-party system. Throughout the South generally, this is still talking from 1959. So this is before the Southern strategy and the realignment in the 60s. So it's interesting to get a point of view from there. Through the South generally, the organization of political parties is informal. Elections are contested by factions within the dominant Democratic Party. Even the factions are very loose and continually changing, with groups within the faction shifting to other factions between elections, because sometimes they're just around a personality. Differences less dramatic. The two parties no longer differ as dramatically on issues as they once did. Both parties now contain both liberals and conservatives, though the Republicans are generally thought of as the more conservative and Democrats the more liberal or economic interventionist party. Now, there's terminology that just was, I don't know, maybe it was dropped in the 80s or the 70s. I couldn't pinpoint it, but there was this whole, like, are you an economic interventionist or not? Today, whether individuals are one or the other depends on some extent on issues, but also to a large degree on what party their families have traditionally belonged to, their religion, ethnic, or economic group, and also where they live. Now, these issues still exist. The whole being like I'm a Dem because my family is, or I'm a Republican because I was raised by Republicans.
Yeah.
But it's definitely not as important. I think similar to ethnicity and religion, these things have eroded. And I think we can blame capitalism for that as well. It destroys all community and all social bonds.
Consumer culture replaces all of it.
And that includes the bond to parties and thus political participation even. And now we're trying to refine that through the tribalism of social media, trying to find community that way.
Right.
But it's obviously like a, quote your favorite situationist line about how it's a simulation or whatever. In the same, or it's a spectacle. In the same study, a comparison of, let's see, a role of issues in determining party loyalty appears to be on the decline. A study made by the Survey Research Center, well, that's about to change in the 60s, but a study made by the Survey Research Center at the University of Michigan on the 1952 elections revealed that almost 2/3 of the people surveyed believed the two parties took about the same position, or said they didn't know what position either party took. They just knew they liked Ike. In the same study, comparison of issue orientation versus candidate orientation seemed to show clearly that the presidential candidate was far more important in the voter's mind than the issues. In summary, political parties are based on issues and composed of groups whose interests are compatible. However, the issues tend to blur, and the success or failure of the parties has come to depend more and more on the appeal of the candidates and the effectiveness of the party political org. Now, I would say this isn't just like a because of mass media thing, because this already goes back to the beginning of American politics. Washington was so popular because of his myth and him as a person, and the same goes for Jefferson versus Adams, and the rest, and Jackson and Lincoln being tall.
Sure.
On the local level, the level which ultimately decides all elections, the issues tend to be played down and candidates played up. The comparable strength and effectiveness of the party orgs are principal factors in deciding who wins. So this is like when any conversation of political strategists talk of how's their ground game. This is referring to it's a code, which it should be like actually brought up. So when people are watching, they actually learn what they're talking about, what's important. Are they asking, or do they have a precinct captain? Do they have precinct captains? Not just a regional coordinator, which is what I would think if you asked me in high school watching national news or something like that. But it's actually mean like, do they actually have a local org that's actually like endorse them and saying we're going to turn out and do doors? And the Clinton machine, or you could say the Democratic Party, is so concentrated on the endorsements of regional office holders that they neglect actual local orgs. Because I would say that in my city, neighborhood associations have a certain loyalty to the local party, and the local party has a loyalty to the national or the state and national party. But the local orgs don't have a loyalty to the national. At least not in a way that I think matters. Like, I don't. Maybe my city is a bad example when talking about like why Clinton lost to Trump. Like why didn't Clinton have what is meant when Clinton didn't have a ground game? I think what it meant was there was no loyalty to the Clinton machine in Michigan or the Midwest. Local parties just didn't care, or they were convinced that they didn't have to do any work or something like that. Or maybe I think they were saying ahead of time, as well as even today, that they can go out and canvass, but they just get a lot of negative reactions. They don't connect with the local people. So they kind of stay cloistered in, like many activists do. Like, oh, I can't go out to the hood and connect with people because like they're going to ask, what can you do for me? And we can say jack shit. And unfortunately, and for us, that we're in the same position. But where Democrats actually have power or could have power and they won't do shit, we can say like, well, we can't do anything now because we don't have power, but we want you to help us to get that. And then we will actually do something for you because unlike them, we mean it.
Right. You're right. We're not just going to use you to get cushy positions for ourselves.
Yeah,
and then
but they won't believe us until we're the ones doing
the
stuff that the Democratic Party used to do,
right,
or do it better than they do. Because in my city, it does feel like they do stuff. They organize the PAL fundraiser for the local sports program or whatever, or the neighborhood cleanups, even though they'll never. I mean, now, thanks to Green Party activism, we have things like plastic bag bans or fees for disposable shit. And so there's maybe less litter. But yeah. But the difference between filling potholes and fixing papering over problems like neighborhood cleanups, but when it's just going to get dirty again, and then everyone gets demoralized and basically doesn't want to do it again because like it's just going to get dirty again. People are still littering, or it's this constant maintenance. But that's again, he says you have to do it 365 days a year. Even though I myself take a vacation from doing, if I do on the ground activism, I don't. We all take a break from it in the wintertime.
Which we should.
In the Northeast, it's cold. No one's out.
Yeah.
No one wants to.
Yeah, right.
Anyway, and it's post-election season, so it's like we want to recharge. Not go crazy. Do some self-care. Okay, back to this. Parties. All right, I think I skipped something. No, okay. Parties are shaped by state election laws. This is something I may have explained already, but let's go into depth. A development of our system of government has placed elections and politics largely in the hands of the states. True. Constitution has made no provision for political parties, which is why, to remind the audience, they are in fact private organizations. The power to conduct elections was given to the states. In effect, this reservation of election power to the states also gave them the power to regulate the form and nature of parties. This has resulted, for all practical purposes, in 100 political parties, 2 in each of the 50 states. That's something I've yet to, instead of having 100 political parties in all 50 states, which is what, would that be better? Probably.
But I think it'd be better, yeah.
Yeah. The point is, each state's like Dem or Republican Party are different, and they actually are organized differently, and they have different rules. It's mad. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why we have.
And then the same goes for, and even minor parties have the same thing. But point is that states actually determine with their rules what's a party and what isn't, who can stand for election, who is going to be able to even run, which is why so many concentrate on independent campaigns, because there's no point in being in a party, because it's like it's a private org. It's like anyway, but it's not practical. So this has resulted. President Eisenhower recognized this when he referred to the Republican Party prior to Alaska and Hawaii becoming states as not one party, but as 48 state parties. Even today, there is no provision in federal law for nominating candidates for president and vice president. In the early days of the Republic, the practice grew up of nominating candidates for president and vice by a caucus of congressmen in each party. King Caucus was an unsatisfactory method, since people of one party living in an area, which was represented by a congressman of the other party, had no voice in the choice of candidates. The movement developed to hold nominating conventions. The first national one was held by the Democratic Republicans in 1828 in Philadelphia to nominate John Quincy Adams for a second term. In 1832, all parties held national nominating conventions after that. The conventions grew out of the need for a broader means to reflect the wishes of the political organizations in the states in the selection of candidates. The national conventions have no sanction or authority under federal law. I'm unsure if that holds true, but I assume it does. As things like the National Voting Rights Act and other types of things that have been passed in the intervening 80 years didn't really touch any of this. The conventions grew. Okay, cover that. State election laws shape the character of politics within the state by specifying how candidates shall be nominated and by setting up the conditions under which political parties operate. So generally, state election laws cover the size of the precinct or election district. Ideally, this will be a geographic area containing from 600 to 1,000 voters. Well, yeah, generally, I guess so. 2, establishment of a board of elections, but the terminology varies. To provide for polling places, man the polling places with clerks, establish the validity of candidates, provide ballots or election machines, and to canvass the ballots to ascertain election results. Usually there is one board of elections per county. And keeping them fair and balanced is another entirely different issue. In my county, and this is across New York State, actually, so this is a New York problem, that the employees in any board of elections office has to be completely balanced between only, and this is in the law, the 2 major parties. So if you're hiring someone to fix the plumbing and that person is a registered Republican, you have to hire another person who's a Democrat to also be an in-house plumber or an IT person, let's say.
Wow.
Yeah.
Really? It goes that deep, huh?
I'm using that as an extreme example, but otherwise, yeah. It has to be balanced, but it's balanced like Thanos's blade. But like my complaint to that would be like, but that's only meaning representatives are there of the two major
It's 2
parties.
major
But
parties,
if
yeah.
New York recognizes other parties, then shouldn't we be required? Shouldn't they require to hire a Green to work in that office? Because otherwise,
You would think.
there is no one in that office that would be on our side.
Right.
Because we have
That seems
had
completely
cases
unfair.
where we ask for information from a county board of elections, so we know the
Mm.
rules and how to actually run
Mhm.
and follow
Mhm.
their rules. And they will straight up give us bad information. They will give us the wrong date that things are due so that we show up a day after or something like that. They say, "Oh, yeah, we checked the rules. You need 1,000 signatures." Turns out you turn them in. It's like, "Oh, actually, it was 1,500. Sorry.
Yeah, whoops, sorry about that, guys.
Guess you won't make it. Guess." And then you when you turn to your liberal friends for about how unfair this is, they'll say, "I guess you just should have tried harder."
Yeah,
Or,
right.
"Well, I guess you weren't ready to play with the big boys then, because if you did, you'd be able to get 2,000 signatures."
Mhm.
Which is what we do. This is the rule of thumb for campaigning for in the Greens, is that you want whatever is required of you, you want to get 50% more.
50% more. That makes
Yeah.
sense.
But it's another handicap that even with all the petitions you have to gather in
Right.
America compared to anywhere else in the world, you actually have to get more than that, because you expect them to throw out like a chunk of your petitions
Oh, good point too.
on in unscrupulous ways, like saying,
Yeah.
"Oh, I can't read this signature," or
Yeah,
"This signature is a dash," when it's supposed to
right.
be a mark anyway. But they'll say something like, "Oh, you put the wrong date on your cover form," or
Yeah,
something of that nature.
it holds you
I
to the
mean,
letter of the
in
law.
my
Yeah.
case, my petitions were thrown out because I didn't put the right office at the top.
Oh,
I put I just put assemblyman when I should have put Assembly District 108.
oh, jeez.
But it's like I just assumed it was like, yes, the district that I live in is the district I'm petitioning for.
Yeah,
But I put assemblyman because the last two times I petitioned for myself, it was as an executive, and I didn't
mm,
have to put mayor of Albany. I just had to put mayor. Anyway, so I didn't think I need to put assemblyman of District
right, right.
105-8. I just put assemblyman.
Yeah, they seem like pretty petty technicalities.
It's extremely petty. You can tell I'm totally not bitter. So
Well, that's good.
they also so the establishment board of elections. So number 3, method of nomination for office. Where there is a party primary election to select candidates, the law may govern the form of petitions and the number of names necessary to get a name on the primary ballot. So personally, this is where things get confusing. Not only do parties make their own rules for their nominations, right?
Mhm.
But then at the same time, the county board or the state board of elections makes rules that are like that layer on top of whatever rules the party has.
Uh-huh.
So it's sort of confusing of like, am I concentrating on following my party's rules or the
Yeah.
state's rules, or when did they you have to make sure you don't don't contradict.
Well, yeah. And how do those discrepancies get resolved too? Like, I assume it's by the
It gets
higher
resolved in your
office.
petitionings, your nomination being thrown out by the board of elections. That's how it ends. It ends with you
Gotcha.
not going forward.
Gotcha.
Because you didn't have enough lawyers to sue the board of elections to get back on the ballot, which will occur when people of the major parties, when they break the rule. They can break the rules because if they turn in their petitions a day late, they'll get their lawyer to get it overturned.
Yeah.
And if you're a minor party, you can get a lawyer and try to get it overturned.
Try.
But by the time you do, it will be 3 weeks before election day.
Right. Yeah, I
Um,
heard about that happening to the Greens in the last presidential election. I think it was like Illinois and some other states where things were
4
close.
states did this to
Yeah,
Howie.
where they
Um,
just
yeah,
completely broke the rules and got the Greens thrown off the presidential ballot, but there just was not enough time
and
to
they were all
get
Democratic
back on.
actors, by the way.
Exactly. Yes, it was the
And
Democrats keeping them
any
out.
time where it seemed like we would, like, say, a judge was on our side, it was a
Mhm.
Republican judge, which leads to
Isn't that
the
ironic? Yeah.
calls from shit libs that, like, oh, we're on the Republican side. They want us to be on the ballot
It's
so
so
we can
ridiculous
take away precious votes from
from those
Biden.
Republicans. Yeah.
And it's true to the extent that if we were on the ballot, we'd be able to get more people who would be riding with Biden,
Mhm.
anarchists who would be voting for Biden
Who would
might
otherwise vote for
vote for
Biden? Yeah,
Howie.
for sure.
Not that they, but yeah, it comes from the whole thing that votes come from the national level down and not from
Mhm.
the precinct up. Because see, if you are from the precinct up, it doesn't fucking matter. All the arguments we have about electioneering online. What matters is what work you're doing on the ground to earn votes. And so it seems like we're still working from this old playbook as if that's still happening. Really, it really is happening. It was happening in Arizona, which is why
Mhm.
Biden won Arizona.
Mhm.
I read a story about this of why there was no Trump landslide, but a Biden landslide. In that you had a lot more active people doing on the ground work
Hmm.
to get people to show up for Biden, and there's so much more of that happening um, than anything else. Meanwhile, Trump's reelection nearing was holding his rallies.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
okay.
Yeah.
So, method of nomination for office. The law may provide that the Board of Elections will supervise and judge the party primary, or it may leave this to the political parties to supervise and judge, which it normally does. And then the party leaves it in the hands of techno bros or whatever.
Ugh.
The election law may state that nomination for public office or political party office shall be by convention or party caucus rather than a primary. It may then provide for the means of electing delegates to the conventions either by party primary or by caucus. Now, it seems a little repetitive, but whatever. 4. Methods of general election. So, this is again, we're just covering what state law, election laws cover.
Mhm.
So, the general election, the law will state the same kind of rules for the general elections as are outlined above for the primary. General elections are never supervised by the political parties. However, they are always managed by the boards of elections or
Which
similar
are
governmental
managed by
authorities who are staffed by who?
the political parties. Yes, got it. Little sleight of hand there, huh?
5. Eligibility of voters. State election laws require that voters in general elections shall be citizens, shall be a certain age. Apparently, Georgia and Kentucky were ahead of the ball with it being 18, 19 in Alaska. There are also residence requirements. There may or may not be a literacy test. And some
Oh,
states require payment of a poll tax for state elections. This is how old this is.
I'm so glad
Um,
we are past at least that part.
well, in some ways, there is. It still feels like there's a poll tax because see, to vote consistently, you kind of need to be a
True,
You need to be a property owner. You can't be someone who's
true,
a digital
true, very true.
nomad or
Mhm.
going from gig to gig, where you may be going from apartment to apartment.
Right.
Um, you owning property is almost like one big poll tax to me.
That makes sense. Yes.
So let's see. In states with open primaries, okay, sorry, I skipped up this paragraph or two. Most states require that voters register at some period before they vote. Sometimes it's like a whole year. That way, you have to live in one place for a year in order to vote there. So if people are like moving halfway through the year, they may have registered in their last residence like properly, but then they're basically deregistered from voting if they moved in the September or something, which is why it's near impossible for college students to vote in the place that they're going to college, unless they're going to college in the same place they live, I guess, or they lived
Right.
as a teenager. Which, yeah, I mean, I voted absentee in my local Albany elections, even though I lived in downstate. And it also meant that I basically was not participating in downstate elections or any kind of politics whatsoever. I didn't pay attention to who my council person was in Harlem when I lived there. I didn't pay attention to New York City politics really at all. State politics, of course, but also I intended to go back to Albany, so it's also like similar to other things in college that I wasn't planting
Yeah.
roots in any way.
Right. Right. It's just a
Um,
temporary. So
yeah, or
you
others
has
know
to.
ahead of time that they're likely going to stay, or
Right. Right. Right.
so. And then it talks of closed or open primaries. So, in addition to general eligibility requirements, there is usually a party membership requirement for voters in a primary election. Now, what is missing is there is no requirements or rules about what counts as party membership.
Mm.
And parties are really not able to regulate who is in and who is not.
Hmm.
The rules, state election law, meaning, make it very difficult for a party to deregister someone in their party. This overlaps with state elections in New York in various ways, where you will have Republicans register as Greens, and then they will, take over. When this not only just the Greens, but any minor
Hmm.
party
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
starts,
Right.
which is
Right. I
why
get you.
any minor party in New York is considered a joke because it is so easy to infiltrate or sabotage. And so, how do we circumvent this? Well, rules state that you need to be a member in good standing to vote in our primaries, not our actual like election primary, but as far as our nominating is concerned. So it's in the
Gotcha.
nominating that you um, determine that you can actually control and say you actually have to be paying dues to
Dude,
nominate who's the candidate in our primary.
that
Otherwise,
seems like a good filter.
anyone
Yeah.
anyone can really petition to be in someone else's primary.
Hmm.
All you have to do is change your registration literally a month before the primary starts, or worse, because we have fusion ballots. All you have to do is get enough signatures from registered Greens to run in or X parties. Uh, People register an X party to run an X party's primary, which fucks with working families just as much as us, especially now with the Greens being off the ballot.
Hmm. So
But
in that case, do a bunch of Republicans then, if they know they're not going to win, do they just register as a Green instead so they can get their name on the petition to get these fake Green candidates in there, or how does that shake out?
well, that's what they do. They
Yeah. Yeah.
like this person say gets a trailer park to register as Greens,
Gotcha.
and then they then circulate a petition among them so they can run in the primary and have our nom and
That makes sense.
be the Green Party candidate and stack lines, because it's like being a grocery store shelf. Like, you want to be as many shelves as possible. On the ballot, there's the parties listed there, and the more lines you're on, it looks like you're endorsed by more types. It's like, oh, he's endorsed by the Greens and the Republicans. Wow, this is a real like straight shooter moderate person who can really has a broad base of support or something.
Does this strategy actually work ever? Like, do they actually get elected when they might otherwise not by doing
Well,
this?
in some ways, it's like the first one pointed out, it's politics. It gets you more, like, it looks like you have more support.
Okay.
And yeah, it does work.
Well,
Even if it's not about
surprising.
getting Green Party voters, which barely exists as a bloc,
Hmm.
um, you sabotage our ability to run an opposition,
I
which is
see.
why
So it's more just
which is
about blocking.
yeah, which is why most of them do it. It's to block
I see. I see. I see.
us from running opposition. Yes, James, it is very corrupt. Fusion ballot in New York is very corrupt, and
What
it's
is the fusion ballot? That's not a term I'm familiar with.
okay. Right, and it helps to be inoculated against this because you'll have progressives want to do election reform, and they'll
Mm,
actually put on their platform like this is the thing we should be fighting for. Or we should have fusion ballots, just like we should have open primaries.
mm.
That's California. What California
We have an
does.
open primary here in Minnesota. You don't have to register. You just show up.
Yeah, right. And it's like we don't need a third party if we just all can just go to anyone else's primary. But that totally means that there's better options, right? So fusion balloting is where you can have a party on a line, and you can basically just means that a party can cross endorse that any one candidate can be endorsed by multiple parties. They just have
Ah,
to be nominated and endorsed by their parties. What's the latest on ranked choice voting? Says Stam. Let me finish with this explanation, and we can move on to that.
sure.
So what it leads to is a bunch of fake parties. As some of them are parties literally just to cross endorse.
Mhm.
So it's like I've registered a bunch. Like so in New York, we had like 5 fusion parties. One was the Conservatives. The other was called the Independence Party, which existed simply to confuse people who thought they were independents and that they're the Independence Party.
I wonder if they're connected to the Minnesota Independence Party that Jesse Ventura ran on, or if it's just completely something. Because
There's
that
probably
that
some
was,
things in common because
yeah,
Independence Party is like we're the moderate party
right,
or we're the party for people who are neither Dems or Republicans.
right.
Because when people say they're independent,
Hmm.
they talk like they're part of some third faction that exists in
Right.
politics that has its own party or something. But yes, as James points out, it's trickery. Um, no, you could get the Independence Party's endorsement by simply paying their committee person or the boss, sending them $1,000 check. And
That's quite a racket, man.
it's an extreme racket.
I'm in the wrong line of work.
And being on that line um, makes you seem more like, oh, you're also not just. It's not a signal that you're moderate, but it's a signal that you're not as partisan. You're not partisan.
Right, you're candidate of the people, willing to listen to all sides, and yeah,
Or the third of voters in Albany
uh-huh.
that are no party,
Hmm.
um, or Democrats who are financially conservative, socially liberal.
Whatever
So
that means. Sure.
you never heard that before?
No, I have. It's just
Okay,
how that ends up playing out. Like, how can you not want social programs but
yeah,
consider yourself socially liberal?
but you don't want to fund
Doesn't-
them, is what it means.
Right, exactly. You just want to have them. You just don't want to fund them. So, okay, that's a real political position.
You want to use market mechanisms.
Which, man, yeah, that works out so well when we had.
So you have the fake parties that are just kind of a racket. You have the conservative party that would always endorse Republicans. You have the working family party that would always endorse Democrats. Sometimes they would run their actual own candidate, but usually in the primary of the major party. So you would have in a Democratic primary, you would have the machine candidate and the working family party candidate. So the working family parties, which you may have heard of and
Yeah,
do
yeah,
exist
I
in a
have.
few other
Yeah.
states, basically the other Yankeedom states, um, that they're basically the DSA. They're the left wing of the Democrats, um, but without the socialism part because they're working families. Not working. If you're working single person, fuck off. That's a joke, but
Oh my god. Yeah.
it's like, yeah. Um, but they're just a small, and when people are sick of the Dems, they're like in New York anyway, like activists I know, they're like, I'm thinking of going working families party. When I was leaving the Dems myself, I went to the local DM working party coordinator executive in my area. And then I went to the same equivalent person for the Greens. And I basically asked both of them, and this is when I'm just an occupier. I'm asking them, like, why should I join your org?
Mhm.
And one gave a cynical practicality answer about how we have to be cross-endorsing party with the Dems because they're the major party with all the power, and we need to be able to get crumbs, or as they would put it, we get a seat at the table.
I've heard that one
And I
before.
say, no, it's like, do we get anything when we're at the table? Do we get crumbs? Yeah, it's just crumbs at the table, really.
Just get a better seat to watch other people make
But
decisions.
it's like, yeah, that's and as someone who's gone to enough council meetings to like have that in my mind when they're saying that, and who's lobbied myself.
Mhm.
So Phil Markham is his name, was not compelling, and also it just came across as a smarmy dick when making this argument, because he would frame it in like, because the alternative is like the Greens and they suck, and they're a waste of time, or all these other things that are a waste of time.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, so then I asked Peter Lavinia. He's like the state co-chair of the Greens, still, or he is now, and before he was something else. But he was also what introduced me to the Greens as being a left-wing party. So I had more of a rapport of him as well. And he basically put it down as his argument was, we're a party that is independent. We take no corporate money, and we're basically free with, we don't, and then I gave him the argument as far as like, what's your argument for why we or the Greens don't cross endorse? And it's basically like, it's a corrupt practice to cross endorse. It is, you don't actually get power. You have to have independence. And that's how it's always worked with oppositional politics. Where oppositional, if you're actually in opposition to the status quo, then you need to be independent of it. And if you're cross-endorsing, if you are dependent on Democrats being elected, and if you're only, plan B is to primary them, well, that's the strategy of the Sanders, Our Revolution, and the last 10 years of, from the TYT and stuff, and I find it the last decade to be, as if anything, as ineffective as being fully independent third party. But what I observe is the independent third party candidates that win local offices do way more good than the DSA primary challenger who wins in the Democratic primary. As far as standing from the perspective of a radical who wants to change the status quo.
Right.
So it is a matter of what your
Be
goals are.
folded in.
If your goals are just to pass bail reform and have that kind of progress, well, then playing is in the machine is the practical thing to do, which is what these pamphlets are really getting into. But there is stuff to learn for starting from scratch or for doing things outside the system. Because it is kind of a blueprint for, like, if you're going to be outside the system, you actually do have to start with some community work, or a party, as this particular pamphlet, which is just party organization, is pointing out the necessity of having a party organization. So whether it is, I would say, a third party or independent organization of the two major parties, because they're capitalist parties. And I think that's the other thing he added, that the two major parties are capitalist. If you're an anti-capitalist, whether or not you're some kind of leftist or socialist, if you're anti-capitalist, you should definitely not be taking part in that. In the same way that an anarchist would argue you shouldn't even take part in elections. But let's say you want to meet them halfway, which is the argument I make, that if I'm going to take part in elections, I'm at least going to do it on my terms. Because if you're doing it in a Democratic primary like Bernie Sanders, you're doing it on their terms.
As Bernie has found out, yes.
Yeah. Now, but it can be argued that in all ways I explain that the Green Party gets rat fucked by state election laws. we're also kind of playing their game.
Mhm.
So, and if I say the Greens can just do community projects to earn people's trust, and so that those state election laws are things we can easily overcome,
Mhm.
then it's like, well, what's the difference between doing that and doing mutual aid work? And we've discussed this in the past.
Should there be a difference necessarily? Can the party not do both?
I
Or
would say that there is no difference. They need to do both. The
yeah,
mutual aid networks need to be part of a party, and the parties need to do community projects.
right
It's
on.
it's hard to do both, but if you do have due paying members that are going to a fund and you can spend money on both,
Mhm.
that should happen, you know. And I think that's Vosh does that, but it's him who's deciding how the money's spent, which is what I don't like.
Right.
That if he gives it to an org, then it's like he is doing the right thing to me. But what org would he give it to? Would he disclose that? You know, what org actually represents his values in politics? You know, is it the Black Rose Federation? Is it who would that be? So
Couldn't tell you. Yeah.
yeah, and that's the kind of the puzzle of a lot of online lefties is they're politically homeless as you could say,
Mhm.
because what org would they fit into until you start interacting with them and you either shape them, they react to you and shape around, or you start to actually change based on them. And maybe that's what a lot of people are also, there's a fear of if I go out into the world and work with a community org, I'm afraid it will change me, make me
Uh-huh.
less edgy, or it'll make me
Yeah.
cringe. It will make me cringe.
Well,
Um,
far be it from us to
yeah. Now
maybe
that's a
say.
fear I kind of that maybe dissolved the longer I worked with the community, my neighborhood association, because the longer I was there, I found I was not being changed by it, and I was having no effect on it, which is why I stopped going. There was basically no. I mean, I think for a moment, for like half a year, I was having an effect,
Hmm.
but that effect I was having was simply aesthetic.
Ah.
I made an effort to change the bylaws of our neighborhood association to bring it into the 21st century because they were written in the 80s.
Mhm.
But I found that the changes I made were unimportant as material conditions determine how
Mhm.
things work, and
Mhm.
changing the bylaws do not change how things work. Um, it didn't change how the meetings would be run. It didn't change like I just wanted to be a I just wanted to like occupy my uh, neighborhood association to make it more like a GA. But all the libs that live in the neighborhood didn't get it, or they didn't understand they didn't understand any different way of just following Robert's rules and having just acting like a committee
Sure.
and who brainstorm stuff to do in the neighborhood and not being able to do much more than simply invite maybe some official to talk to,
Sure.
which is what I found the meetings useful for. Um, yeah, just having people who want to outreach to the neighborhood use us as a conduit, at least for people who are active and want to do something. Which is part of what made a GA great is that people could show up and then working groups would pitch what they're doing and people go like, "Oh, I like that. I'll go to their place next."
I like that. Yeah.
Which is what, but with Occupy, the place next was there too.
Mhm.
In a city neighborhood, it's there's no hub. You know, there has to be a neighborhood hub for this to work. Otherwise, you're just using this little community room that, yeah, it's not very homey. It can
Right.
only fit 20 people.
Oh yeah. I remember when I started a transition towns group in the North Metro, and yeah, first we were meeting at like a Starbucks, and then it got to be enough of us that we moved to the employee break room at a local grocery store, and that's where we
And that was the highest level of civic space you could use, right? There was no
pretty
bigger
much.
space you could
Yeah,
use.
yeah. Or the hours were wrong. Like we thought about
Yeah.
like the library and stuff like that, but the hours were never long enough to
Yeah, the
kind of thing.
library has a big community room that I'm next to, and it's the main branch, and it has a big room that can be used. But yeah, you can only book it for so long because there's
Right.
so many groups, which
Right.
more
That
speaks to
too.
the
Yeah.
level of demand that exists for civic space
Yeah,
and the lack of
absolutely.
it. That there needs to be 5 times more like little meeting spaces. But the difference is the library is free, while any other civic space that maybe churches would provide or
Mhm.
nonprofit would provide,
Mhm.
they usually have to charge.
Right.
Um, yeah. Otherwise, the church would have to like waive the fee. Otherwise, you have to pay them like $150. And the same goes for even the community arts center that I'm working with a program of theirs, the radio station. But with it, they're in a rehab church, and again, the rate for renting it is like it's more than it should be in my eyes. But if it's a matter of cost of heating and land taxes, I guess, and other things, you got to charge something. The library has a tax base to draw on.
Right.
Now, similarly, orgs and civic spaces also need to draw from a tax base, meaning members.
Right.
Um, but the thing about it's odd to talk about voluntarism and stuff because you can only have amazing things like the library because the taxes are not voluntary. And when you have taxes that are voluntary, you can fund some things,
Right.
but only for certain groups of people, only for enough.
Mhm.
It's more of a service then. It's not a entitlement.
And it depends too on then sustained attention and activism to keep that pool of money coming in as well. Like tax base, it's just always automatically going to be
Yeah.
deducted.
Everyone
So
complains about it, but
right, right, right.
you get the roads, the libraries, the
Uh-huh.
aqueduct,
Right,
public order.
right, right.
What else do they do for you? Um, and state. Okay, so yeah. Let's skip the open primary and closed primaries. You all know what those are.
Yeah, yeah.
Structure of the parties. Number 6. The state part law, and this is state laws, may provide for election in a primary of 1 or 2 county committeemen or precinct leaders in each election district, and that these committeemen shall meet a stated intervals to elect a county chairman and other party officials or officers. It may provide for the election of state committeemen and that they shall meet at stated intervals to elect state party officials. Only the basic characteristics of state election laws have been touched upon in this brief summary. However, they demonstrate that state election laws give form to the operation and structure of parties within a state. Party rules, on all levels, take up where the election law leaves off in determining how the parties are organized and what functions they may perform. So there's the party structure, which parallels that of federal, state, county government, and local government. You have a national committee, a state committee, a county committee, a town or a city, but then you go down one more level to the ward. And then the ward itself contains the election district or the precinct, which itself is the neighborhood. Now, in
Mhm.
my city, we have enough. We're quite unique. We have a lot of We have a lot of council seats. We have 15. It's been said, and then the county level, we have 30, I think, which is one of the largest in the country. And this is because the neighborhood is the ward. In some cities, the ward is multiple neighborhoods. Faye Calkins in the CIO in the Democratic Party describes party structure as follows. Parties in the U.S. are roughly similar in one respect. However, their basic structure. Both major parties are built in the form of a pyramid of precinct captains, ward leaders, county committees, state committees and conventions, and national committees and conventions. Kind of sounds like I'm reading the Bible. A description and a diagram can only generally illustrate the structure of the parties, which vary greatly at the state and local level. In some states, the parties have almost no visible structure. In others, they have a very clear, definable one, which may then be virtually ignored because it is the local custom to do political business in the local political clubs. So here's well, it doesn't have to be geography based. And this is something that I've seen occur a little bit or referred to, is that you'll have a bunch of communists not join any party or organize any community org, but they'll form a club.
Mhm.
And actually, it's both, encouraging that such people clubs exist, that we're finding each other in real life, but also extremely infuriating to me because we had a bunch of commie clubs that like 3 of them exist locally, and
Really?
they do absolute jack shit.
Oh,
Um,
is it more
meaning
like a book
we were
club?
trying.
They just sit around and talk, or
It could be
social
that.
club, or
They helped. A few of them helped organize, or at least joined in the May Day that we threw last year.
oh, cool.
And I think I asked them, like, "Oh, what do you do, or what do you plan on doing?" And as far as gauging, like, "Hey, are you guys going to be of any help in
Yeah, yeah,
building leftism?" And I pretty much got some dickery questions, answers. I mean,
that
and
sucks.
but yeah, they're book clubs or they're just social groups, which I'm not like, not hating them on them just for that.
No, those can
But
be important starting points.
yeah, it's a starting point. It's a starting point,
Yeah,
right? They're
yeah.
dipping their toe in by
Right,
basically
right.
being a group in the first place.
Yeah.
Um, but like you learn politics by doing, and whether it's an org or a party, when you volunteer for that, you're going to learn how to do things. And that's kind of there's no present apprenticeship program or college degree program that you do join to learn politics. You have to be an intern, usually
Mhm.
unpaid. I don't, or you should expect to be unpaid. So it's unfair, right? It's just as unfair as saying that an architect has to have an unpaid internship, or any other type of person should go unpaid. Or you're getting paid in experience, you're getting paid in exposure. And this is the way politics is introduced to basically anybody.
Mhm.
Um, and of course, being that we're all cash starved, it's something that we just can't afford to do, as you pointed out. We need a way to find a way around this. And the answer that Howie gives is that if we all pay $5 into a pot, then at least one of us, or at least a few of us, can be paid. And a few paid organizers is
That
everything.
can be massive. Oh, yeah,
It's
that can be
it's
a complete
everything.
difference.
Having
Absolutely.
3 people whose job it is to maintain lists and contact
Mhm,
people
mhm.
and go
All
out and
that
do
legwork.
community
Yeah, yeah.
projects. It's the start of more, because they start those projects. Those projects bring in more supporters, more due paying members, and just like in any actual union, that then they can be 5 paid people and 10 paid people. Now, as any anarchist who knows their history would tell you, this leads to a hierarchy of the paid party bureaucrats and the due paying workers, who are
Yeah.
now in separate classes.
Yeah, I get it. Mhm.
But what's the anarchist? What's the honest question? What is the anarchist alternative to this?
I guess just all
To
volunteer, and
Yeah, all
then we're
volunteer.
at the mercy of capitalist realist limits to that, so
Well, the alternative, as far as I can gather, is to just check out entirely. That
oh, well,
you,
sure. Just be a
um,
completely individualist
that
anarchist,
right,
and,
right, right. Your payment is in doing all the mutual aid stuff, so that you're actually free of capitalism. Like, you squat your housing,
yeah,
you dumpster dive your food, and
yeah,
whatever, and other things, types of different types of stealing or scrounging, and then you can be a full time anarchist organizer.
sure.
Or in the case of, not disparaging him, but my roommate, come into some money by,
Mm,
say, inheritance or something of that nature.
well, that's cool.
Uh, but it is frustrating because that's not a strategy at all.
No, that's random chance
So
that.
so it's like a necessary evil that this a union
Yeah, I can get on board with
class
that.
structure would have to develop. But that's to me that's one less class in capitalism.
Yeah, and really, yeah, two classes that are more or less on top of each
Yeah.
other. That's worlds better than what we got now.
But something we can learn from previous generations, especially like the union bureaucrats of the past, is that the job of the people who are paid organizers is actually to expand, not just get some treats for the working class, but to make it so that everyone is in their position almost.
Yeah.
Or that their job is not just to organize some what is it some concessions from the ruling class or the status quo, but to actually build socialism like in cooperative Jackson.
I need to look in more on cooperative Jackson. I should cover
Yeah,
them sometime here.
it can be
I
framed
only
as
know
building post-capitalism, but they themselves will also say they're building socialism.
that's cool. That's cool.
Yeah, in the form of
I've
like
only
co-ops and co-op houses and stuff.
That's great.
Model structure. Perhaps the best way to explain party structure is to analyze a more or less model system with some of the variations. First, there are precincts. The basic unit of a political party is generally the precinct or the election district. Terminology varies in different sections of the country, but the meaning is about the same. A precinct is a geological voting unit with a certain number of voters residing in the area. Party leader is the precinct, called a committeeman, precinct leader, or a similar name, who gets out the vote of his party on election day. He develops a following in his precinct, and if he is a capable person, he can influence voters in party primaries and general elections. So this implies that they need to be an extrovert. That and this is where like there's a cultural like I don't know the conflict in and maybe it's a construction of extrovert versus introvert.
Yeah.
And that politics is the realm of extroverts, that they will dominate it, and they always have, and they always will. And the place of the introvert is to, or their role is to be the supporter, the person
That's
who's
what I was just
behind
gonna
the
say.
scene, who's maybe organizing the campaign, but never out front, never the person doing the
Yeah.
door knocking. The
Writing
extroverts do the
speeches.
canvassing.
Yeah.
Um, Growing up, it seemed like extroverts were only and maybe this is just in meme format as well, that extroverts are involved in partying and not doing any work. That they're involved, or they're the priorities of the extrovert, the Becky, the whatever, the Chad, is that capitalism rewards extroversion. That you get rewards for that. You get better pay. You get the more opportunities because you're just more likable, or that you're able to be more likable, have more friends, make friends with the right people, even if it's fake. That you're able to do that while an introvert cannot. That they will be exhausted just trying to talk to the boss
Yeah.
to get a promotion. So it leads to thinking like it's their priority to chase money and prestige and liberal economy, and that they're not interested in this is just younger me speaking, really. This whole like introverts care about others way more than extroverts do, even though extroverts. This is just edgy teen thinking, actually.
I gotcha. Yeah.
I get to it, but sometimes in the back of my mind, sometimes, but I've mostly thrown it out, I believe. But it's something why does it come up? Because just in thinking about like there are these essential roles for party building and doing better politics. And I think, oh, you know what? Instead of now I get it. Now it hits me. All of our extroverts, referring to the left, they're on Twitch and YouTube. They're not being community leaders, and that's where we need them.
Oh man.
Vosh would be mayor of Portland by now, right? If he put his talent into local politics?
I mean, I know you're saying it in jest, but maybe he has
No,
organizations
I'm
behind him.
I'm
He's got
80
money behind him already.
I'm 80% serious.
Yeah.
Because even though like the money he raises or earns is from a national and even international
Mhm,
audience,
mhm.
he would only need a fraction of that to basically, well, A, earn a living,
Uh-huh.
and B, have the base of support to run local politics.
Yep.
And he has the charisma and the rhetoric down
Debate
of
skills,
a,
yeah. Mhm.
he would dominate.
Yeah,
But
he would.
um, and he rightfully, partly rightfully believes that he's influencing many, many more people than he would on the local level. And that's also the trap we fall into online,
Yeah.
that we are influencing so many more people. We're having so much more impact. It's the only way to have an impact. But at the same time, we all know subconsciously that all politics is local and we need to be having a
Very
local
true.
impact. And it's very difficult to do both, which is why I try to split the difference and have a well, I'm actually going to shift entirely. Like I said, I'm doing your program. That's my
Mhm,
national, like I'm affecting other people.
mhm,
But I'm doing the local radio station
mhm.
as a means of building something in my
Local movement.
community and being a local name. And then once I shift to local news, I'm going to be way more comfortable outreaching to everyone in Albany, in my town, of who I am and what I'm doing, that I'm actually going to do local journalism and not just commentate on the local news. I'll start with that
Yeah,
and educate about Albany history and stuff like that. But eventually, by next season, well, not season,
next
cycle,
next cycle, yeah, yeah.
that I'll be actually actively covering not just local politics, I mean just local news, but talking about it as a communist, so that people are get comfortable with these ideas in ways that they could never before.
That's great.
I'll get certainly I'm ready for the pushback, um,
Yeah.
but that's fine. That's what you get. It's what you have to do.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
But at least it'll be pushback from maybe listenership or people on the beat, and
Mhm,
not
mhm,
just people who are already in power, who are already comfortable with the way things work, because
mhm.
they have already done. They've done what's in these pamphlets. They've
Right.
taken the they did the they've done the internships. Um, Interesting thing about internships in New York, that there's a program for interning for in the state assembly and the Senate, but mostly the assembly. Anyone can apply to it. And you don't need any specific resume. Like, you don't need to be in political, like, you don't need to be coming from a political science program. Because I have met someone, I did an episode of my show, um,
Mhm.
which I forget what I called it, maybe the two and a half left show or something. But I interviewed a guy who's running for Congress right now in the primary. He's a Dem, or at least running it in a Dem primary,
Mhm, mhm,
against
mhm.
our very like 10 term, 6 term congressman.
Oh, wow.
And he started as an intern, like he had one type of degree, and he was just happened to be in downtown Albany. And I don't know, I really was puzzled at like what inspired him to do that. Like, he walked in and said, like, how would I work here? And I guess this is something an extrovert versus an introvert. Like, an extrovert goes in and asks, like, how could I work here? How do
Mhm.
I get a job here? Can you give me a job? While an introvert is like fiddling away with online applications and worrying about whether they're qualified or not. And if you have charisma, you don't need qualification. Your qualification is that you're likable.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
but he had a degree, and he started interning, and that led to one thing or another, and he was like a paid staffer. And but then working on the inside, he found that there's just there was limits to what could be done to help people. And so obviously he's a bit more radicalized now. Um, so that's interesting. His name's Slava. But anyway,
Interesting.
um, let's keep moving here.
How
Unless
much
we're
is
at
left in the chapter? I wanna go maybe I mean, I have
a
a
little bit
pretty hard
further. Yeah.
cutoff in half an hour, but, just curious how much is left in this
We're
particular
we'll pick up next
section.
time. There's let's say 1, 2, 3, 4. 5, 6, like 10 pages.
10 pages?
Unless I really go forward, but I think.
Yeah.
Oh wait, I'm sorry. No, that's all bibliography. No, yeah. Let's see if I can skip to some important paragraphs here.
Okay, let's do it.
So he goes through this structure. There's a party leader. I think as radical lefties, we can ignore all of this, especially as he's describing the structure of things at the time, but they haven't changed too much. Okay, how about I read this? The influence of the county leader. There are close to 3,100 counties in the U.S. Most of them have Republican and Democratic county chairmen. These people have great influence in shaping government and politics at the local and even national level. In some areas, of course, the real leader of the party org may not be an office holder, a political office holder, or someone who has any position. In exercising that leadership, however, he must work through the county chairman and be able to influence the actions of it. Because the chairman is a person to whom the members of the party have delegated authority to handle political decisions. Thus, the leader of the party org in an area holds his leadership because he holds the loyalty of a group of citizens who will work to nominate and elect the ticket he wants. His authority stems from his ability to hold together the org. The president, governors of states, and some mayors can dominate a party's politics in their respective areas through the power that exists in their office. But even they will find their authority curtailed and will be less effective if they do not understand or are unwilling to exercise the skills necessary to maintain the strength and loyalty of their party org. The elected government office holder wants to be reelected. He wants to keep his job or get a better one. They're careerists, just as everyone else does. And to this, he must be renominated and reelected. Therefore, he must be careful to maintain good relations with the political leaders who can help him. If he breaks with them on an issue of importance to him and to his org, he must be prepared to fight for his renomination in a party primary, the convention, or the party caucuses, depending on how candidates are nominated in his area. Now, I want to point out that this is just like how things are. These pamphlets are actually talking about how things work, because that's something that a lot of idealism that many people have when going into things and starting, say, the Bernie campaign, people volunteering for Bernie, they didn't understand how things really worked. They were really idealistic about, like, yeah, we'll if we have popular support, we'll win. But you didn't have the county chairman on your side. Who was that person? Now, after the fact, Bernie crats would be like, okay, we're gonna fix this, and Bernie will win in 2020. We'll be working to make sure that a Bernie-crat is the county chairman, or that we'll have more votes on the county committee, and we'll be able to make sure that things are fair for Bernie in 2020. Now, obviously, they didn't get far enough, but there were the cases like in Nevada where they did take over the state Democratic Party, and but it didn't matter. Because the capitalists and the real power there and Harry Reid's machine basically split from it and did their own thing and sabotaged them. And the only thing they can do is argue about how dishonorable they are and how unfair and how unprincipled they are as Democrats, that they weren't supporting the party and the person that we were nominating for president, that was Bernie. Boo hoo. You didn't understand how things actually worked. And or you're still acting like you don't know how things work, even when you just got a full lesson. So and this is and the same with and this is let's see, India Brown in Buffalo. You know, they won the primary but lost the general to a write-in campaign. Because turns out the actual Democratic machine or the party wasn't actually, like, they got the votes of the people, but they didn't get the party to support them. You know, they were not going to support a socialist, so they turned to the local rich people and the Republicans to fund a write-in campaign to ensure that Miss Brown lost. So there's more to read, but I think that we want to wrap up and address
Yeah.
like comments from Peanut Gallery. Actually, Peanut Gallery is something that shouldn't be referred to. That's one of the,
Really? Is that a fraught term somehow?
yeah, because it refers to like the people in the back that eat peanuts and
Ah.
black people who eat peanuts.
Oh, I had no idea of that history of that term. Interesting.
There's a lot of things like that. Like in college, when I don't use it, I never used it often, but I use the phrase like a spade, and my old black professor basically said like, Dan, don't use that phrase
Yeah,
again.
don't say that.
That's
Yeah,
referring to like
I can see that.
because spades are the black suit,
Mhm.
and saying like, well, you can't change a nigga is a nigga,
Oh.
is what that means. And he can probably be he can remember a time it was actually used in the original meaning, and that's yeah. And I actually I corrected my brother because he used Eskimo, and I said like, Lou, you want to use Inuit, And at first he was like really like he did his usual like, oh, you're telling me what the fuck does it matter, I'm like, because it means snow eater in Cree, and it's a slur, and it's like
Yeah,
that's what
yeah.
it's like. So don't.
That one I did know about. Uh-huh.
Well, yeah, I read the explanation of why you use Inuit, not Eskimo.
Yeah.
But obviously, Eskimo is what white people use. So obviously, it's
Mhm.
you use the name they use, and they call themselves Inuit.
Mhm.
Just like you should say, I'm a New Yorker, and not like a name a slur for a New Yorker.
Slur for New Yorker.
There probably is. There's got to be something. Yankee latte sipping liberal. I don't know.
Limousine liberal. Sure.
Whatever. Okay, so someone asked. That's right. Someone brought up ranked choice voting. I don't know the latest.
Oh, yeah.
There is a ballot access news. Let's see if I can bring that up in a link. Let's see.
I know Minneapolis has instituted it for the mayoral election, and
Yeah, what I
they
can
still ended up
point
with the regular liberal, but
I can point.
at least it's there.
I can point out that I myself am not really. I mean, I'm down with it, but I'm not enthusiastic.
Really?
We need multi-member districts. That's the reform to really fight for. Oh,
Proportional representation you're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think Amanda's gonna
That's
sit
what
for the last 2
real
weeks.
parliamentary, like liberal democracies have in Europe.
Yes.
That allow Greens and other minor parties, even socialist parties, actual ones, not just anomaly socialist
You mean to
parties like
move
in
over?
France.
Mhm.
They can they win seats, and it matters. Scotland is renationalizing their railway, and I think
yes.
the Greens can say they can take the credit for that.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
because Labor alone wasn't going to do it,
right.
and the Scottish National Party was like on the fence about it. They were like, saying one thing and not doing the other.
Sure.
Hi, Amanda.
Hi.
We haven't been formally introduced, but
yeah, there's my wife Amanda.
But I've watched a stream a bit.
Sure.
So, okay. So Green Pages. So the Green Party does have its own news organ called the Green Pages, and it is now for the first time of this year, or last year, all digital. So if you go to greenpages.org, let's see. I know I have that saved. Yes. Wait, let's not open it here. I will close the stream.
No, that's not
It's simply greenpages.org. Oh, sorry, greenpagesnews.org.
Oh, okay, because it was redirecting to Green America.
Yeah, you don't want to avoid that. There's a lot of posers out there, by the way. So yeah, if you could put in that, it's greenpagesnews.org. So they have a recent article from the last edition, which is if not quarterly, it's put out twice a year because it's all volunteer. So it's an enormous amount of work to put a magazine together.
There you go. Ranked choice right in the top of the page.
So the headline, probably written by someone in Maine, argues that it has made a difference. My observation is it hasn't. Our candidate there for Senate got the same amount of votes that she probably would have gotten otherwise, even if it wasn't ranked choice. But they would probably say that maybe it helped their local candidates in Portland, so that they now have elected someone on the city council there, maybe because of ranked choice. And it certainly has helped in places here and there, but it's not a systemic reform because you still have all the biases of major party politics at play.
It's still winner takes all.
And winner takes all and all of that. And it really, unless, that alone doesn't make third party candidates or more attractive. Base organizing and that grassroots building from precinct up is what wins elections. Because when it comes down to it, you can have a lot of support, a lot of donors. If you don't have enough people getting people out to vote on election day, you lose. Because despite it all, you'll still have a fraction of people just not come out. You can have people agree to vote for you, say they're going to vote for you in the weeks before election, a month before, as you're door knocking, and then they won't show up. It's odd the level of commitment that people really have when it comes to being active in politics, that they're still viewing it as a consumer choice, that they can maybe go without milk another day or something like that, that they can not come out and vote for the candidate that they liked. They need to be asked the day of to do it. And that's what wins.
Sorry. Go ahead. What were you
I was
saying?
just gonna say, it'd be nicer if they'd stretch in-person voting out a week, maybe.
Yeah.
Instead of just a single day. Okay, you've got between
like they did during the pandemic.
Right.
Yeah.
Because
that would definitely help turnout.
It raised turnout 20%. Yeah, it did raise turnout quite a bit. It wasn't massive participation, but it would make it possible to get out the vote in a way that you could stretch it out. Yeah, stretching it out over a week, get out the vote. It really changes the dynamic immensely.
Absolutely.
That you have to almost change your playbook. That because there's a playbook you have for campaigning and electioneering that would need to be massively edited. With all the changes that have been occurring the last few years, though some of them are being rolled back in various ways, or maybe I'm just thinking state to state that it's not consistent, or you have a lot of blowback that even party Democratic Party bosses and stuff will want to say okay, pandemic's over, we'll go back to no multi-day voting, no. Well, they're definitely not sending. They're already. I'm thinking about the school election where they sent a ballot out to everybody by mail, an automatic ballot to everyone on the list. They didn't do that this year or last year. They only did it the year that things were shut down and people couldn't actually go to the polls. Now you can. It's back to status quo. Back to it's on you. You're not going to get. You have to either request a ballot or, no. It's the difference is that you have a faction of Dems that obviously want it to be normal to be able to vote by mail, and you have a bunch of people that are like, no, you still have to. We should go back to before or normal, which is you have to request and have an excuse for why you're voting by mail.
So I don't know why things like federal elections, it's not a universal, no matter what state you're in, it's the same. You can vote by mail. You have X amount of time. You can go vote in person. You have X number of days. Instead,
I think it's because the power was given to the states to run themselves, so they didn't want to have federal interference. At least that was the justification. I understand what you're saying, but
because when I think about where we live in Minnesota, I don't feel too much strain or pressure about voting, I do it.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's no
We make the
pressure. But
time.
like,
Mhm.
if we lived in the South, I think I'd feel very differently
Or in a
about that
rural area,
process.
yeah. Place that was harder to get to the polling place, for sure.
Where there was more constraints on whether or not I could vote, or it would be made substantially more difficult, or if I missed a time, then
Yeah.
yeah.
So to speak to James' comment about people believe that a vote for a minor party is a wasted vote, that is more of a rhetorical issue more than the structural, like how voting is set up. Because even with all the structural like blocks to say gaining office holders, when the more minor party votes are racked up, that does affect the attitudes of those in office. Now, if they are an asshole and they're all about doing their own thing and they're a principled Republican asshole, then I suppose that doesn't play a part. But we can point many times, at least in New York, when we get more votes, the Dems bend leftward. When we don't get any votes, they take their base or general progressive leaning people for granted.
Yeah.
And basically like, well, they can't, well, they're not going to vote Republican, and obviously they're
Right.
not voting Green, so we don't have to work at appeasing them.
It's like the Pelosi effect, basically. If you can marginalize the progressive wing of your party, then or the progressive wing of voters, then
we get Howie gets close to 10% in the New York governor's race, and
that's pretty good.
suddenly Como starts doing all this progressive shit.
Yeah.
And then he can say he's the most progressive governor in America. Because then the next cycle, Howie gets less than 9%, gets like 6%, and then Como's basically like all moderate Democrat,
right,
all the way. And in the last cycle, it did even worse, or because it was 2020, we did terribly. And when you know it, all the Democrats don't give a flying fuck what progressives are arguing for. Now, sometimes the squads say at the table, and they can say they're getting gains and whatever. But there's real like stronger gain, like the gain you get even more when there's an opposition that is quote unquote taking votes away.
Right.
And that's without winning.
Right.
But while you're gaining votes on larger level elections, that is a base to win on the local level, because it means that like you can look at the results for the presidential race and see the wards or the areas where more people voted for green or gold. And that's like, okay, that's where I could canvass and find more like-minded people and find some more volunteers for a campaign there. That's the argument how he makes, and I see it in practice as well.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, because right now, the neighborhood that the most people vote green is also where like the DSA has done. Basically, they endorsed a Dem, and it's a DSA. I don't know if she was an actual member of DSA, but she certainly acts like it. And she was even like pro-Palestine, when asked. And she just but what is the extent of the gains from having such a person who's not a opposition party is rather, when activists ask for something, they act on it. So like we get a resolution that the city will not put in any more beg buttons when redoing an intersection, because this was inspired by an intersection that's on one of our major parks where there's a lot of foot traffic.
Mm-hmm.
The traffic engineers, we already have a smart streets initiative ordinance and other shit. We have all these other things to basically say, hey, make the city more walkable when you do something. they made it less walkable. They put in an intersection light that's timed so that there's no walking cycle.
Oh.
So you have to push a beg button for a red
Mhm.
light, which is asinine,
Yeah, it is.
considering that on one of the intersection is a one-way with barely any traffic on it, but the crossway is a major artery, and that's the issue. So that's basically always going to be green with 30 seconds of like red, but that's like for car traffic that could be turning. So
Sure.
you can only get a full red lights for you can walk by pushing the beg button, because we call them the beg button because you have to beg to cross the street.
Right.
But this is in the middle of our urban, the densest part of the city, actually, which is also the densest part of the region. So yeah, it's a bit of an outrage. Why would the traffic engineers do this? But they're following their rule book that just says you want to make the traffic flow as well as possible, even if that means putting pedestrians in harm's way. So anyway, a lot of discretions there. Do we have any other comments?
No, I think that was the last one was from James there. So I think
yep. So it was
pretty well covered it.
So next time we'll do the rest of part 2, and part 3 is the political precinct. So that's like the local politics itself. So I should have less to digress about there.
Okay.
Because it actually talks from starting from scratch, which is the part that is the real meat of like because I don't want to talk about how parties work in 1950s America and party structure and all that. That was pretty boring, I'll admit. But I want to get to like the real hard stuff of like, how do you start from scratch? How do you start from scratch?
No,
especially in neighborhoods where everyone's dislocated and apathetic, and it is really, really, it's hard to start from nothing.
It's hard.
But it starts with in any organizing workshop kind of starts with like, just talk to people, just talk about anything. Could be sports. Just you build a rapport first, and then they're comfortable with you, so you know that you just have to make friends. Gotta make friends with people first, I guess.
Good. Well, that's exciting. I'm looking very much forward to next time. So you're thinking about a couple weeks when we rendezvous again?
If we do it every other week, that would be great.
Yeah. All right. Sounds good. So yeah, make sure to check out Dan's show. You can find all his stuff at 3lefts.news. There it is in the chat. Is there anything you wanted to highlight? I just started your most recent podcast.
I have not been making a lot of new episodes for numerous reasons, but I have been able to upload a number of my most last 10 episodes onto YouTube. So those you can
link that too.
Yeah, YouTube channel. You get that up.
Yeah, that's how I've been listening to your podcast mostly recently.
Whoops. Yeah, others. Someone mentioned that like, what is it? Whether it's Google Play or Spotify, it only has the last 10, right? So soon I'll be going beyond the last 10, and my goal is to add 2 every week. I obviously add more if I'm not doing a new show, but I should be able to do one. Well, actually, I don't even know if I'm doing one this week. We have a technical issue. Pacifica is updating all the streams, so our stream is down, and if there's no stream, it's iffy if I could record in the studio. I can try to, but last time I did a live show last week, was it? I wasn't broadcasting, or I had a really dumb mistake. I had a button wrong, pushed wrong, and I wasn't going out, so it wasn't recorded. Because see, my show gets
recorded either.
It doesn't. It gets recorded through the Pacifica stream. It is possible to record it on Audacity on the studio computer, but the computer is getting old and it's super slow, and I'm not even sure if it could take running Audacity now. Sure. I could try, but it's possible I would lose it again. And so I'm not sure I want to take the risk. We do have a radio meeting to do So which doesn't, conflict, but it's just more that night, and I'm just so washed after work.
Yeah,
It was
I feel that.
no big deal when I was working part time, but now it's the opposite. I'm slowly going to work my way to just like 3 more full episodes, and I'm going to a 1 hour format to do local news or regional. But I'll still do that, general content with you and online if possible. The idea is that I can do 1 hour show, and then
Yeah,
I'll
yeah,
feel comfortable doing more live streaming on my
very
Twitch
good.
channel. But that's all for the future. See if it's possible. I'm working. I have personal issues right now that
Hmm.
are definitely interfering slash taking precedence,
For sure.
as well as my own life with my new job. And maybe in another month or so, when I have my other support person that I'm working with, I'll feel my workload will be in a way where it feels good, and I feel energized when I get back from work, and not the opposite.
Yeah, I
But
sure
it's
hope so.
just like when I worked full. Last time I worked full time, I could barely do like my activism consisted of some basically keeping Occupy Albany on life support.
Gotcha.
I wasn't able to build anything.
Gotcha.
So yeah, that's the extent of it. YouTube is basically what I'm working on for the last few weeks, and so on.
Very good. Yeah, I recently listened to your Para What episode. I enjoyed that very much. That was cool.
Hmm.
Going through
That was
those
with the Mayhem
ideas.
Colin, who is now playing Resident Evil 2 on his stream.
Ah, very cool.
He's like, I'm doing it for the content. And yeah, because Paracom is one of those things where like it's either not radical enough for people or it's too radical.
It sounded that like when you
And
were going through it with him, that was the case. Not
it's
quite radical for their taste.
because it's not like he's anti-work, so it's like this isn't
Yeah,
anti-work
yeah,
enough.
yeah.
And
He
that's
didn't
the,
like having the credits. Yeah.
and that's with any radical leftist that I feel like should be for Paracom, or at least thinking about it
Hmm.
as a model and thinking like using it.
Hmm.
And but they're like, there's something about it that like they have more of a 21st century attitude, or more recent attitude that just doesn't gel with Paracom as a model.
Yeah,
There's
makes
just
sense.
something. It's always something, but it's like, well, you don't throw out something because 20% of it isn't radical enough.
Right. No, it so
Um,
much of it would be incredibly better than what we have.
yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, to me, it's just more like there's these 5 parts. So like, what
Hmm.
part has an analog with what, say, Co-op Jackson is doing?
Yeah.
So like, how could Co-op Jackson coalesce, or any co-op economy coalesce into something that's actually not capitalism? And I think Paracom answers some of those questions.
Yeah. Very good. Anyway, I just thought I'd mention that. Love that show.
Yeah.
So
Next episode will be international politics. Going to talk Cuba. Just an article that I've yet to
great.
read. Just like how Cuba survived the fall of the Soviet Union.
Which is
Then
incredible to have. Yeah.
an article from the Progressive, which kind of disputes the Uyghur genocide, but not in a totality. Just that, yeah, China has an oppressive party top-down structure, but calling it a genocide is like,
Maybe a bit much.
yeah, it's a bit much.
Especially
And
while ignoring the children in cages that still
yeah.
exist in this country. So
And then the second hour, I found a good article from a Ukrainian activist talking about the situation there. And then it will overlap with some other reading I have about general internationalism. Actually, that will be the theme: internationalism.
cool.
And that what's missing from a
Stuff.
lot of our dialogue is what is the long-term goal, which is to strengthen the UN and democratize it. Because the answer to the way to prevent world conflict is to end military alliances. And the only way to do that is to have a strong UN that we elect people to. In the same way the EU ends conflict within the EU, but only for states within the EU, right? And the EU isn't democratic enough, but that's something that like that's the left-wing argument, like not to end the EU, but to democratize it. Just like with our industry, like we don't need to go
Makes sense.
primitivist. We just need to democratize it. Okay.
Couldn't agree more. All right.
All
Well,
right.
thank you so much for doing
Good
this
night,
tonight.
everybody.
This is a good time. And see you in a couple weeks.
Bye-bye. Ciao.
All right. So that was Dan of the Three Left Show. Go check out all his contents. For those of you watching on Twitch, hang with me a little bit. We're going to raid into another place. Otherwise, I'll say goodbye to the rest of you. Thanks for joining for the last few minutes here, Amanda. I always appreciate you being on. And the crowd does too. Obviously, the numbers have gone up since you've been on. So, well, I'm serious. They have. What are you being like that for?
Crash your party.
One last plug before I go. We are building a leftist creator collective on Facebook, carving out a bright spot in an otherwise very gloomy, boomer-dominated platform. So go to facebook.com/leftsignalboosttv. And if you're a leftist creator of any kind, where we're accepting applications from all sorts, streamers, video creators, podcasters, visual artists, poets, musicians, whatever you got, interpretive dance, puppet theaters, whatever it is that you work your medium or work leftism through, whatever medium you use.
I should make a puppet show for kids on leftism.
That would be awesome. Authors, if you're a leftist author, come join.
Drag queen, leftist drag show.
All right. I'm glad to have you here, James. Thanks for sticking through. Always a pleasure to have you in the chat there. And thank you, everyone, for contributing to the conversation. It was a good time, and I look forward to our next time doing it. But
That's
other than
what
that,
leftism is about.
yeah,
Having conversation
and building community. So that's what we're trying to do. So we'll raid into bread crochets. If you're unfamiliar with leftists on Twitch, here's another good one to check out, wherever it is that you're watching this from. Bread crochets. They do theory, listen to theory, and at the same time, crochet really cool stuff. It's a great channel, and a great guy who does it. So check them out. And then otherwise, I don't know. I haven't talked to Mike yet if we're doing permaculture tomorrow. So I'll announce on Facebook whether or not that's going through, because I think he might be having a special class outside of his normal permaculture design course thing. But if he's doing something different, maybe we could, maybe Amanda could come on and we could talk about something that she feels like talking about. See where we go. Maybe we could do plants or something like that. So, just an idea. Just throwing it out there.
Oh.
Anyway.
Folks want to talk about plants?
Yeah. All right. Anyway, we'll start the raid with bread crochets. Stick with me there, Twitchers. Help out. Help me out with improving my standing in the Twitch leftist community. So here's bread crochets. See you all tomorrow night. And if not tomorrow night, for sure on Wednesday, we'll do more anarchist stuff.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.